Chapter 958. Looking at Junmo's empty sleeve, Qin Yin said, "Your arm was cut off by Lu Bai, which means that you are stuck in the mortal world. What you need most now is the mercy of Buddha. That's why you left Chang and came here. In that case, why do you still resist? Why don't you really convert a Buddha?" Junmo looked at the mountain in front of the field. The mountain was only 200 miles away, which was very close, so it looked even more majestic. He slightly raised his eyebrows and asked, "How do I convert?" Qin Yin looked at the bleeding iron sword in his hand and said, "Put down the butcher's knife and become a Buddha. There are statues of Buddha, skeletons, gold-cast instruments, and silver-inlaid skulls. Monks have prayer beads on their necks, and nobles have ears on their necks. This is not the Buddha kingdom, but hell. There are no living Buddhas here, only evil ghosts." Junmo withdrew his gaze and looked at him expressionlessly. "If I really want to become a Buddha, how can I not kill all of you evil ghosts? Since I want to kill you, how can I put down the butcher's knife? In a mortal world, maybe you can put down the butcher's knife and become a Buddha, but here, picking up the butcher's knife is the way to become a Buddha." Qin Yin was silent for a long time. Then he looked at the ragged serfs and said, "Do you really think that you can take these people away by yourself?" Junmo said, "I wanted to take these people to build a road to the ground. Although the cliff is high, it can be built if we keep building it for generations. But now I feel that time is a little tight, so I changed the way. Since we can't get out, I will take them to the mountain to see the scenery." There were many mountains in the underground world, but there was only one real mountain, which was the Prajna Mountain. At this time, it was reflecting the morning light in front of everyone's eyes, shining brightly. That mountain was the remains of Gautama Buddha. What Junmo had to do was to take the millions of serfs in the underground world to behave wildly on the remains of Gautama Buddha and enjoy the sunshine and warmth. Qin Yin slightly raised his eyebrows and looked angry. He shouted, "Don't deceive yourself. How can you do it alone?" Junmo stood in front of thousands of serfs and shouted, "Open your eyes. See how many people there are." Qin Yin was so angry that he laughed and said, "Do you expect to rely on these people to mess up the Buddha kingdom? Don't forget, these fools are like ants. How can they fly?" Junmo said coldly, "More than 20 years ago, you once said in the wilderness that there were flying ants that listened to the chief monk's sermon and flew away while bathing in the light. Now you even want to erase your own ideas?" Qin Yin's chest tightened, and his Zen heart was suddenly disturbed. He said, "These people are guilty, so they are stupid." Junmo said, "Do you know why Buddha set up a commandment that forbade the monks in the temple from teaching them words and knowledge, let alone teaching them the Dharma?" Qin Yin was silent because none of the eminent monks of the past generations, including him, could figure out this problem. It was understandable that they did not pass on the written knowledge, but wouldn't it make the sinners more pious to cultivate Buddhism? "Qin Yin, your faith is not as strong as you think. There are millions of serfs in the underground world. Any old woman would be 100 times better than you in this aspect." Junmo shouted, "Because you are literate and because you cultivate Buddhism. Cultivation is always a matter of doubt. If you don't doubt, you don't cultivate. Therefore, cultivators will eventually doubt the Tao, and cultivators of Buddhism will naturally doubt the Buddha." Qin Yin's face was pale, and the back of his robe was wet with sweat. He gradually felt uneasy. Junmo looked in his eyes and said, "Buddha knew very well that only the truly stupid people would have the real firm faith. Therefore, he did not allow you disciples to teach the Dharma to the people in the underground world. He wanted these people to be stupid. Only in this way could he create the Western Nirvana, and then he was so confident that he dared to trap Hao Yin. You said these people are guilty, so they are stupid? Bullshit. Their stupidity is the sin of your Buddha." Qin Yin wanted to say something, but Junmo did not give him a chance. He continued, "Besides, Buddha forbade you from teaching them Dharma knowledge because he was afraid. If everyone woke up and became Buddha, how could he maintain this evil nirvana? You bald donkeys, if you don't teach them words and Buddhist scriptures, they will naturally be stupid. Now I teach them words and wake them up." What I want to dig out is your foundation, and what I want to destroy is this Buddha land. I like to see how you can stop me. There are thousands of serfs standing behind Jun and Mo. It seemed that they had not changed much from before. They were still ragged and dirty, and some of them even looked hungry. But if you looked closely, you would find that their eyes were still calm, not as numb as before. They became lively. The eyes of human beings were used to see and find freedom. Only then would they be lively, as if they were alive. That was the real life. During the year of the serfs' rebellion, apart from fighting everywhere and hiding from encirclement and suppression, the thing they spent the most time on was learning. At the beginning, Jun and Mo taught the herdsmen of the tribe on the cliff to read. Then the herdsmen became teachers and taught other companions to read. They had never been in contact with knowledge or civilization. Once they started to learn, they became so hungry and began to grow at an unimaginable speed. Looking at the serf's eyes, Seventh Yi knew that Jun and Mo was not lying. Thinking of Jun Mo's efforts and spirit in the process, he could not understand. He asked, "Why do you have such great malice against the Buddhism sect and the Buddha? If he did not have great malice, he would not have made such a great effort." "Why?" "Because all of you are evil." Jun and Mo said, "I hate monks and Buddhist temples the most. In the human world, you do not produce, but specialize in cheating the poor of gold and silver. It is even more so here. How abominable it is. How can I not hate it? Of course, what the priests of Haotian Taoism do is no different for what you do." Seventh Yi silently thought that the Buddhism sect's shortcomings were also worse than Haotian Taoism's. "Since you know this, why do you hate the Buddhism sect more?" "Because Haotian Taoism has never hidden their purpose. The priests of the West Hill Divine Palace want to rule the world. They want power and wealth to satisfy all kinds of desires. Even if they pretend to be benevolent and loving, they do it very casually and can no longer deceive more people." Jun and Mo said, "The Buddhism sect is different. Your pretense is higher, your acting is better, your memorial archway is bigger, and your deceptions are deeper. I find it even more unpleasant." Seventh Yi said, "Is this the difference between a real villain and a hypocrite? It is the difference between a robber and a thief." Jun Mo's words directly reduced the noble Buddhism sect and Taoism sect to dust. Then he looked at the serfs around him and said, "Of course, here you have both." Seventh Yi said, "My sect also has countless brothers who cultivate diligently in the world and abide by the precepts. They are not greedy or angry, and they are merciful. Can't you see this?" Jun and Mo looked at the giant peak in the distance and laughed. "Abide by the precepts? Your temple is full of thieves and prostitutes, and the mountain is full of illegitimate children. How do you talk about this?" Seventh Yi said, "Master Qishan is the descendant of the former chief preaching monk. What do you think?" Jun and Mo said, "Master Qishan is truly virtuous, so he left the Xiankong temple when he was young. Do you want to use him to gild the Xiankong temple's Buddha statue? Does the Buddha statue have any shame?" In his opinion, the Buddhism sect was full of hypocritical, bald donkeys, just like what Qin Yin had done in the past. With a compassionate face, he deceived the eldest brother's kindness and set up a killing trap in the Lang Temple. How shameless! Back then, Jun and Mo killed Qin Yin with his iron sword. He first asked if a gentleman could be deceived. Later, he said that a gentleman should play with a square chess. He used the square iron sword in his hand to cut Qin Yin's outer body Dharmakaya. Today, in front of the Xiankong temple, in the Buddha kingdom, he used his words as a sword to cut Qin Yin's face. Why? Because he was in the right. If he was in the right, he could go anywhere in the world, no matter in the alley or the main road. Qin Yin had been practicing silent meditation for nearly 20 years, so he was not good at debating. Jun Mo's words had pierced the deepest part of his Zen heart. How could he say anything? He could not argue. Since he could not argue, he could only fight. Qin Yin stretched out a finger toward Jun and Mo on the meadow. His finger broke the autumn wind and seemed to draw a circle casually. Then a circle appeared behind his head, emitting endless light of Buddha. He retracted his finger and put his palms together in front of his chest. His body also began to emit light of Buddha. As his monk robe fluttered, the lines on the edge of his body strangely expanded into the air and instantly became countless times larger. Another Qi Nian appeared in the field, with a face full of anger. His eyebrows were like swords, and his eyes were full of thunder, as if he could suppress all evil spirits in the world. It was his Dharmakaya, Akalanatha. First, he used the perfect Buddha's will, and then he used his Dharmakaya. But Qi Nian did not stop. The Dharmakaya of Akalanatha stretched out its right palm in the air and slightly bent its index finger. It was the mantra Mahamudra of the Buddhism sect. He practiced silent meditation, so he did not need to speak Buddha's words, and the Buddha's words would resound between heaven and earth. In the Buddha's words, the mountain-like Dharmakaya of Akalanatha pressed toward Junmo with the Mahamudra. The Mahamudra was still like a mountain. The endless mountains were stacked on top of each other, which was the wonderful meaning of prajna. Qi Nian was indeed a powerhouse of the Buddhism sect, a world wayfarer. His attacks were in the 3 levels of divine sense. Facing such a strong enemy, even Junmo gradually became serious. How could he break the 3 levels of divine sense? Just like facing those monk soldiers on the battlefield, Junmo used his sword. Still, he only used one sword. This did not mean that Junmo looked down on Qi Nian and regarded him as the same level as those monk soldiers. Previously, he only used one sword because one sword was enough. Now, he only used one sword because only one sword was enough. Junmo's seemingly simple sword strike actually encompassed all of his cultivation realms. The simplest was the most powerful. The broad and straight iron sword broke the autumn wind and stabbed on the mantra of Akalanatha. The Dharmakaya of Akalanatha was like a mountain, and so was the Mahamudra, which cast a large shadow on the field. In contrast, the iron sword in Junmo's hand looked like an inconspicuous wooden thorn. The thin wooden thorns stopped the palm that was falling from the sky. The wooden thorn even pierced through the palm. No matter how strong the palm was, once the thin wooden thorn pierced into the palm, it would be painful. The iron sword stabbed into the mantra of Akalanatha. Qi's face was slightly pale, and his palms, which were put together, were bleeding. Chapter 4, I'm going to eat something. I'm too hungry. The next chapter will be later. Don't wait, everyone. Tomorrow will be the same. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 9, 59. No matter what kind of divine sense it would be broken by the sword. It was not because the divine sense was too weak, but because the iron sword was too strong. If the iron sword could break the Dharmakaya of the Akalanatha, it could also break the body. Qi Nian was injured in the first encounter. The 3 elders of Commandment Hall, beside him, suddenly looked shocked. Their thin chests suddenly swelled up as if they had inhaled a lot of autumn wind. As they breathed, a series of extremely complicated and difficult syllables came out of their lips at a high speed. The whistling sound was very scary. In this way, the elders of Commandment Hall finished chanting the text in a very short time. It was indeed difficult to understand because it was not an ordinary Buddhist scripture, but some kind of incantation. Cultivators had many means, such as talisman and psyche. The powerhouses of the Buddhism sect also had their own special skills, and the art of incantation was one of the most powerful. The incantation that the elders of Commandment Hall were chanting at this time was a wonderful method that countless former eminent monks of Xiankong Temple had practiced after thinking hard. Vairocana Devil, subduing mantra. The most important thing for the former monks of Xiankong Temple was how to maintain the Buddhist kingdom in the depths of the West Wilderness. After Buddha's nirvana, how should the Buddhism sect deal with the demons with great divine sense come? Buddha had left a lot of legacies in this underground Buddhist kingdom. Not to mention the pear tree that Buddha had personally planted, the rocks that Buddha had personally refined, and the Prajna Peak was the remains of Buddha, so they shouldn't be worried. Unfortunately, the monks in the temple didn't know how to use these to deal with the enemy. Because of this, countless eminent monks racked their brains and finally found a way to use the power of the Buddhist kingdom with their collective wisdom. This method was similar to the law of words, but it had lower requirements for the caster. As long as the caster was willing to give up his flesh and longevity, he could borrow the infinite power left by Gautama Buddha from the Buddhist kingdom. This method was the mantra, the Vairocana exorcism mantra. This method was cruel to the spellcaster and always had an ominous bloody taste. Once it was used, it would be extremely powerful. Once the innocent was hurt, there was no way to save them. Therefore, the Xiankong Temple had always hidden this method in the Commandment Yard. Only the 3 elders of the Commandment Yard could practice it, and only the chief monk of Scripture could decide when to use it. Junmo's cultivation of Sword Tao was world-shocking. Now he was going to shake the foundation of the Buddhist kingdom with the serfs. Naturally, he was the great evil demon that Xiankong Temple had been wary of for countless generations. If he didn't use it now, when would he use it? The Vairocana devil subduing mantra rang out. The underground world immediately sensed it. The wind howled in the wilderness and the rocks rolled restlessly. The Prajna Peak, 200 miles away, seemed to tremble slightly. The east peak, where the commandment yard of the Xiankong Temple was located, was even more furious. The yellow temple shone brightly. In a flash, a beam of Buddhist light rose from the east peak to the sky. The Prajna Peak was transformed from the body of the Buddha. The Mahavira Hall on the peak was the head of the Buddha. The left palm was placed in front of him, facing the sky, which was the cliff plateau where the pear tree was located. The right palm was put together with the Anjali Mudra, which was another wonderful place. The east and west peaks were the left and right shoulders of the Buddha. The Buddha's light soared into the sky, as if there was something on the shoulders of the Buddha. Vajra exorcism pestle. A strong wind blew. The Vajra exorcism pestle flew down from the east peak and smashed towards Junmo's head. This demon-subduing pestle had no specific shape, but the Buddhist light field was dozens of feet wide. Even if Junmo could avoid it, the majority of the thousands of serfs behind him would be smashed to death by this pestle. Junmo's face suddenly turned pale. With a clear roar, his monk robe fluttered, and the iron sword floated in the air in front of him. He no longer held the sword with his left hand, but stretched out his right hand to hold the hilt. His right arm was cut off by Liu Bai in front of the verdant canyon, leaving only an empty sleeve. Holding the hilt with his right hand was like rolling the sword with his sleeve. The power of the iron sword suddenly increased. There was a loud bang. The iron sword and the Vajra exorcism pestle met in the sky above the meadow. Although this Vajra exorcism pestle was not performed by the Buddha himself, it was borrowed by the power of the Buddha by the 3rd elder of the Commandment Yard. The Vajra exorcism seemed to contain the power of the entire Buddha kingdom. Junmo was famous for his swordsmanship. After Liu Bai's death, he was undoubtedly the best in the world. However, his swordsmanship was all in his right hand. After losing his arm, he had no hope of peeping into the way of heaven. Even his state and strength had declined a lot. That was why he came to the Xiankong Temple to cultivate Buddhism, hoping to find another way. For a whole year, he did not cultivate Buddhism, so naturally he did not find a second way. However, he went further and further on the original path and walked more and more firmly. Who said that without the right hand, one could not enter the way of heaven with the sword. Whether it was a left-handed sword or a right-handed sword, it was a sword anyway. As long as his spirit and courage were still there, he could hold the sword with his right hand if he wanted to. Junmo's sword was like a country, and even the Buddha kingdom was shattered. The Buddha's light shook, and the Vajra exorcism pestle was broken. It turned into countless golden flowers, falling on the meadow and the stream, as if it was more beautiful than the golden sand flowing out of the abandoned gold field. The 3rd elder of the commandment yard suffered from the backfire of the sutra incantation. His spirit suddenly dimmed, and his face gradually withered. Junmo, who had cut the Buddha's exorcism pestle with the iron sword, was naturally not well. He was shaken hundreds of feet away like a flying stone. The weeds under his feet were all crushed, and the golden flowers were flattened. Blood oozed from the corners of his mouth. He finally stopped moving backward. He sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes to meditate. He began to restore his psyche power to heal himself, regardless of the blood flowing from the corners of his mouth. Thousands of serf warriors suddenly separated and then suddenly gathered together, surrounding him in the deepest part of the crowd. They raised their weapons and stared at the enemy in the distance. They looked vigilant and firm, giving people a feeling that if someone wanted to kill Jun Mo at this time, they must first kill all of these serfs, and not even one of them could be left. "Protect the living Buddha," the serf warriors shouted in a hoarse voice, cheering for their companions. Although they were a little uneasy, no one showed panic, and orderly and quickly arranged the camp. What Qin Yin said before was right. Jun Mo had fought against thousands of troops in front of the Verdant Canyon, and the West Hill Divine Palace Coalition Army could not take a step forward. That was because of the terrain, and it was inseparable from the help of the Academy, and it was only for 7 days. Now he led the old, weak, and sick serfs to fight for a whole year. They had been fighting hard, and he was already exhausted. He did not know how many times his psyche power would be exhausted. Today he broke the Vairocana devil, subduing mantra of the third elder of the commandment yard with the iron sword, and he was also seriously injured. His psyche power was in urgent need of recovery. Fortunately, he was very skilled in cooperating with the serf warriors, or it would be really dangerous. At this time, more than 100 soldier monks were dead or disabled. The third elder of the commandment yard sat cross-legged and adjusted his breath. If they wanted to forcibly break through the desperate defense of the serf warriors and kill Jun Mo, only Qin Yin could do it. Qin Yin looked at the drop of red blood in his palm, and then looked at the people in ragged clothes in the distance. His emotions were very complicated, so complicated that he could not make a decision to fight. The eyes of those serfs were so angry and so hateful. No one knew how terrible the fighting power they would burst out. More importantly, could they defeat the injured Jun Mo? In front of the Verdant Canyon, Jun Mo's arm was cut off by Liu Bai, and the world sighed because everyone, including the chief monk of scripture and the abbey dean, thought that he would never reach the way of heaven in this life. In recent years, the so-called generation of destiny began to appear in the cultivation world. In the unknown places of one temple, one Taoist temple, one school, and one second floor, there appeared a generation of geniuses, Tang of the Devil's Doctrine, Yi Su of the Haotian Taoism, Mr. First and Mr. Second of the Academy, and Qin Yin of the Buddhism sect. Liu Bai and the Master of Calligraphy were half a generation earlier than them, while Yi Hongyu, Chun Pippi, Ning Ke, Imo Shanshan, Tang Xiaodang, and Long Qing were half a generation later than them. Therefore, they were called the generation of destiny because they had the highest state, the most hope, the most vitality, and the most imagination. Among this generation, it was a fact that the eldest brother of the Academy, Li Manman, was the strongest. In the war against the Tang Empire, this gentle scholar showed a wonderful state, which also proved this. Below the eldest brother were Jun Mo, Yi Su, Tang, and Qin Yin. The four of them walked side by side, and no one knew who was a little stronger and who was a little slower. In the Battle of the Verdant Canyon, Jun Mo defeated Yi Su and became the strongest among the four. But soon his arm was cut off by Liu Bai, and he could no longer maintain his position. Qin Yin thought that he could defeat Jun Mo, but it seemed that it was not so. In a long and hard battle in the underground world for a year, Jun Mo became much weaker because he had consumed too much energy. But at the same time, he also became much stronger because his will was tempered to be stronger, so strong that it could even affect the reality. Seeing that Jun Mo broke the Akalanatha with his sword and cut the Vajra scepter of Buddha, Qin Yin knew that Jun Mo's state had at least recovered to 90% of his heyday. In terms of sword Taoism, he was even better. How on earth did he do it? Qin Yin was a little confused and hesitated. It was at this moment that he missed the best time to attack. In the distance, the crowd gradually separated, and Jun Mo came back with the iron sword in his hand. His lips were still overflowing with blood, and his face was still pale. But since he stood up again with the iron sword in his hand, It meant that he had recovered enough psyche power after a short period of meditation. At least he thought that it was enough to defeat Qin Yan. Qin Yan asked himself again, how on earth did he do it? The shock and confusion of the enemy was the source of the confidence of his companions. The surf warriors held up the bamboo spears and bone sticks in their hands and looked at Junimo as if they were looking at an invincible god. Guru is mighty. The living Buddha's power is unparalleled. Hearing these words, Qin Yan thought of the serfs shouting to protect the living Buddha and suddenly laughed. He looked at Junimo and said sarcastically, you want to destroy the Buddha, but in the end, you still have to use the name of Buddha to drive these ignorant sinners. Don't you think it's ridiculous? Junimo raised the iron sword, and the fanatical shouting behind him stopped instantly. He carried the iron sword on his back. Although thousands of serfs were a little confused, none of them hesitated. They retreated as fast as they could, taking the important supplies, and fled to the depths of the field. Qin Yan looked at the serfs, who quickly retreated like the tide. He frowned slightly and was puzzled. Junimo said, why is it ridiculous? Qin Yan said, if you're the Buddha, do you have to destroy yourself first to destroy the Buddha? Junimo said, I am the real Buddha, and your Buddha is the fake Buddha. Qin Yan shouted, how dare you say such nonsense in front of Buddha? Junimo straightened the iron sword and said, if I am the Buddha, he can only be the fake Buddha when Buddha comes to see me. An elder of Commandment Hall heard this and said angrily, today I will send you to see Buddha. Junimo ignored him and looked at Qin Yan and said, don't you understand? Qin Yan thought of a possibility and his expression changed slightly. He said, what on earth do you want to do? Junimo said, I took 3,000 soldiers and traveled for 700 miles just to get you and these old monks to come here. Qin Yan stared at his eyes and said, then? Junimo said, at this time, there are no more powerful cultivators on the peak. As long as I get through you, I will meet my senior brother on the cliff platform. We will kill the chief monk first and then cut the chessboard. How about that? Qin Yan's face turned pale and said, your goal has always been that chessboard. Junimo said, of course, my junior brother is in the chessboard. How can I not save him? Qin Yan was silent for a moment and suddenly said, are you sure you can get through us? Junimo said, I didn't know at first because I was not sure how much of my state I had recovered. Previously, I killed the Wisdom King and broke the Buddhist pestle, so I'm very sure that as long as I'm not in the peak, you can't stop me. Qin Yan looked at him and said, do you know what is in the chessboard? Junimo looked at him and said, I said before that even if Buddha is in front of me, I will say that he is the fake Buddha. Qin Yan said, you want to see Buddha? Junimo pointed at the Prajna peak and said, if the mountain doesn't come to me, I will go to the mountain. If Buddha is in the mountain and he doesn't come to see me, I will go to see him. Qin Yan asked, even if you can see Buddha, what can you do? Junimo said, to destroy this hellish Buddha land, there is no faster way than to kill Buddha. Anyway, it is the same sword. I have to try. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 960. From the beginning to the end, what Junimo wanted to do was to overthrow Shinkong Temple's rule over the underground world. But right now, what he wanted to do most was to go to the cliff plateau and take away the chessboard left by Buddha. Because Ninkei was now trapped in the chessboard, and he did not know whether he was alive or dead. And because Ninkei was his younger brother, there were countless temples and unknown Buddhist formations in that majestic mountain, as well as powerhouses of the Buddhism sect like Qin Yan and the Commandment Hall elders. He did not think that he could force his way up, so he led the rebellious serfs to kill in the wilderness and lured Qin Yan and the Commandment Hall elders here. As long as he could get past these 4 people, Junimo would be able to go straight to the peak. If he could kill these 4 people along the way, it would naturally be even better. Because regardless of whether he could take away the chessboard or not, exterminating Buddhism had already become the most important part of his life, and it had to continue. Until now, Qin Yin finally understood why the fighting style of the rebellious army had changed so much these days. The marching route was no longer strange, and they bravely rushed to the foot of the peak. They did not care about the strength of the rebellious army. Even if they reached the foot of the peak, they would be annihilated in the end. It turned out that they wanted to scare the tiger in the mountain. They wanted to lure the tiger in the mountain to Pingyang, and what Jun Mo wanted to do was to enter the mountain and take away the chessboard. Looking at the surf rebels retreating like the tide, Qin Yin was silent. He knew that he and the three elders of the Commandment Hall might not be able to stop Jun Mo. Through the previous battle, Jun Mo had completely grasped the strength of the two sides. He was very confident that he could get past this barrier, or he would not let those who followed him retreat first. If it was in a mountain or on the mountain road, Qin Yin was confident that even if Jun Mo became stronger, he would not be able to step on the stone steps with the help of more than 10,000 monks of Xiankong Temple. But now the wilderness was so open. How could he stop him? Qin Yin's face was pale, but his eyes were calm. He looked at Jun Mo, who was walking slowly towards him, and looked at the iron sword in his left hand. He took a deep breath of the slightly cold autumn wind. His monk's robe danced wildly. Because of the sudden autumn wind, he only took a deep breath, and the countless autumn winds between heaven and earth all entered between his lips and began to wash his Buddha heart. With such a Buddha's might, heaven and earth naturally sensed it. Silk-shaped clouds floated in the dark blue sky. Those clouds were pulled even thinner, as though they were sugar threads that could not be pulled no matter how hard one pulled. All the weeds within a 1-mile radius suddenly bent down and fell to the ground, as if they were worshipping, revealing the white bones of humans and beasts, as well as the dust-covered gems, which were rolling in the wind. The stream flowing in the abandoned gold sand field was so shallow and clear, but at this moment, the crazy autumn wind blew out countless ripples, and the mud at the bottom of the stream was suffused with the color of water. Qin Yin opened his lips and started the silent meditation that he had cultivated for 20 years. The Zen Dharma closed his mouth and did not speak. When he opened his mouth, there was no sound. Only a wisp of wind slowly flowed out from between his lips. This wisp of wind was so gentle, so merciful, and there was a faint scent of sandalwood in it. In the endless chill of the autumn wind, he found the gentle feeling of spring wind. This was the ability of silent meditation. The faint scent of sandalwood and the fresh smell of the wind were dependent on each other, but did not mix. The silence of Buddhism was not really silence. Thunder could be heard in the silence. There was a thunder-like Buddha roar in the sandalwood that was slowly sent out by the wisp of wind, just like the heavy rain always accumulated in the thick clouds like cotton. When the thick clouds suddenly dispersed, there was a heavy rain and thunder. The roar of Buddha suppressed Jun Mo in this desolate field, and at the same time informed the monks in the Xiankong Temple among the peaks. Breathing was the most common and the most easily forgotten movement of the human body, so it was natural and fast. In Buddhism, breathing was also a measure of time, which was extremely short. Within a breath, Qin Yin started the great magic power of the Buddhism sect. Who could be faster than him? Jun Mo's sword was faster than breathing, faster than the autumn wind, faster than the heavy rain. In the blink of an eye, it came to Qin Yin's front, in front of his eyes, and in front of his lips. This iron sword seemed to be even faster than the silent sound. Jun Mo's sword came to a foot in front of Qin Yin. Jun Mo's sword was Jun Mo. Qin Yin naturally came to a foot in front of Jun Mo, starting from Liu Bai. The swordsmanship in the human world had undergone earth-shaking changes. The lonely and invincible sage of sword finally wanted to turn the world upside down and then died. But the true meaning of his swordsmanship was left in the human world, and it began to shine in the hands of many people. The disciples of the sword Garrett, Ning Ke, and Yi Hongyu all had Liu Bai's sword. The one who was most qualified to inherit Liu Bai's swordsmanship and could even go further was, of course, Jun Mo. He was Liu Bai's strongest opponent in swordsmanship in this life, and he was naturally Liu Bai's confidant. Even Sang Sang could not avoid Liu Bai's sword, and could only use her own world to block it. Then how many people could avoid Jun Mo's sword? At least, Qin Yin could not do it. Qin Yin knew that he could not avoid this sword, so he did not think about it from the beginning. He just gently blew at the iron sword. It was still a gentle breeze from the beautiful spring, but it was condensed by the endless autumn wind. It contained the true meaning of Buddhism, the reincarnation of all things withering and rebirth, and it could eliminate all the killing intent in the world. Jun Mo's iron sword could not move forward because he could not pierce through the cycle of life. The sword could not fall from the front. He turned his wrist, and the iron sword flew away from the breeze as soon as it touched it. It suddenly turned in the air without a trace of autumn wind and slashed at Qin Yin's neck. The iron sword whistled through the wind, and Qin Yin's eyes suddenly brightened, like the gems on the Buddha statue. He still could not avoid this sword, so he did not avoid it. His right hand, which was put together in front of his chest, came to his face. 3 of his fingers were naturally hanging down, and the other 2 fingers seemed to be touching, as if he was holding an invisible flower facing the edge of the sword. The iron sword was broad and thick, but it had the intent of sharpness. The invisible flower between Qin Yin's fingers had the sense of tranquility and zen. This flower was not a flower of the human world. Even in the spring wind, it would not invite bees to fall, so the edge of the sword could not fall. The iron sword was gently pinched by Qin Yin's fingers. Jun Mo withdrew the sword. This movement seemed simple, but in fact it represented an extremely shocking state. How many people in the world could walk away from the pinching flower fingers, regardless of illusion and reality? Jun Mo still looked calm. He flicked his right sleeve and took a step forward to the right. The iron sword in his left hand was pushed to the back by the sleeve wind, and then he slapped at Qin Yin's cheek with the back of his hand. A forward sword, a reverse sword. Anyway, it was a sword. Let's see how you can block it. Qin Yin could not block it, so he had to take it head on. The Buddha's light shone, and the Dharmakaya of Akalanatha appeared in the field again. Then in an instant, it disappeared into his body. Being invisible did not mean that it did not exist. The Dharmakaya of Akalanatha was taken back by Qin Yin. From this moment on, it was no longer an external Dharmakaya, but a Dharmakaya. His body was as strong as King Kong. The iron sword fell heavily on Qin Yin's cheek. There was a crisp sound like a slap in the face. A very clear red mark appeared on Qin Yin's cheek, as if he had been slapped. Then his face swelled at a speed visible to the naked eye. 9 of his strongest teeth were slapped off and shattered into pieces. The pieces spread in his mouth, and blood flowed down from the corner of his lips. Body as the Dharmakaya of Akalanatha, as strong as King Kong. As long as it was not like the chief monk of scripture who had become a Buddha with his body, there was no reason that Jun Mo's sword could not smash him. Qin Yin felt very painful and also very humiliated. He was the world wayfarer of Buddhism and was recognized by the cultivation world as a powerhouse of the destined generation. But today, he was defeated by Jun Mo in such a contemptuous way. How could he not be humiliated? Because of the pain and humiliation, his Zen heart could not calm down and began to tremble. The corner of his mouth that was overflowing with blood also began to twitch. The breeze that blew out from his lips could not continue and scattered into a ball to protect his face. Although he was very angry, he clearly knew that if he did not protect his most dangerous face, Jun Mo's next sword was very likely to directly smash his head into pieces. Jun Mo did not continue to attack, because the 3 Commandment Hall elders were ready to attack at this time behind Qin Yin. He just wanted to break into the mountain and did not want to stay here for long. Jun Mo's blood-colored monk robe fluttered slightly. He stepped on Qin Yin's head with his right foot, forcibly interrupting the second silent meditation that he was preparing, and landed among the 3 Commandment Hall elders. The 3 Commandment Hall elders sat in 3 places, forming a triangle. The distance between them was exactly the same, which was the standard number of 3 by 3, which was the number of Buddhism. The elder with the highest cultivation sat in the direction of the foot of the mountain, which was in front of Junmo's path. If Junmo wanted to go up the mountain, he had to pass this person before Qin turned around. It was the iron sword that came to the elder. The Commandment Hall elder looked slightly serious, and the prayer beads in his hand shone and stopped the iron sword. The other two elders began to chant scriptures. Junmo reached out to hold the iron sword, and the prayer beads suddenly broke, turning into Buddha beads all over the sky. The Commandment Hall elders shouted in unison. The string of prayer beads instantly exploded, and the Buddha's power shrouded the field. Junmo swept up, stepped on the elder's head, jumped high, and then landed on the ground in the distance. Just like that, he charged forward, completely unreasonable. The divine powers and the Buddha beads all landed on his body. The Commandment Hall elders looked at Junmo, who was rushing forward at a high speed in the field, and saw the fresh blood flowing out of his body. They knew that he must have been seriously injured, and could not help but feel a little shocked. He left just like that, without even unleashing a single sword strike. He'd rather get injured than stop and fight a single battle. Was this still the proud and conceited Junmo? In the desolate field, the blood-colored monk robe fluttered in the autumn wind. Junmo was like a graceful swan, and with the momentum of the chi of heaven and earth, he rushed to the mountain in a flash. He was still the proud Junmo, but he was just confident and never conceded. No matter how strong the enemy was, he would not be afraid. Anyway, he would fight with his sword, but if it was necessary, he could temporarily ignore his pride. He wanted to grab the chessboard, and he had to take advantage of the time when Qin and the 3 Commandment Hall elders were not in the peak. What he needed was time, and nothing else mattered. Of course, this did not mean that he would not care about the injury he got today, but he would deal with it later. In the future on the battlefield, he believed that he would meet Qin and the 3 presidents of the Commandment Hall again. Anyway, they would meet again, and at that time, he would naturally fight with his sword again. This chapter is all for today, and there will be 3 chapters tomorrow. I wish everyone a good mood and good health. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 961. A firework lit up the dimly lit underground field. A cloud of smoke and dust cut through the surface of the field and quickly extended to the giant peak ahead. Junmo was at the forefront of the smoke and dust. He rode the wind with the help of the chi of heaven and earth. The iron sword in front of him broke the wind silently like a real sword, moving forward at an unimaginable speed. The firework was a warning. The alarm in the giant peak rang loudly. Countless monks rushed out of the temple and came to the mountain road, ready to set up a great formation of Buddhism to suppress the invading enemy. Junmo, who had turned into a sword, was so fast that he was even faster than the light that shot toward the giant peak. He had already reached the foot of the mountain before the formation of Buddhism was completed. The autumn mountain was silent. The green bamboos on both sides of the mountain road suddenly swayed. The monks saw Junmo coming and saw the iron sword in his hand. The monks of Xiankong Temple took action, so Junmo naturally took out his sword. He came so fast that the formation of Buddhism on the mountain road between the peaks was not completed, but he just broke through it unreasonably. Until then, the autumn wind suddenly rose and whistled back and forth between the bamboo forest and the mountain road. There were dozens of blood stains on the green bamboos, which looked like red tear stains. No matter whether the blood stained the bamboos belonged to monks or Junmo, he had entered the depths of the giant peak and was rushing on his own path, his way of being a gentleman. Junmo's way of being a gentleman was to reason with the enemy first. If the enemy did not listen, then he would crush them. In the field at the foot of the mountain, he had already talked a lot with Xiankong Temple. Since the Xiankong Temple did not listen, he would not continue to talk and crush them directly. Qin and the 3rd elder of Commandment Yard were still rushing back from the field. The powerful people in the temples had no time to react. Junmo crushed them all the way. He held the iron sword in his hand and directly killed his way to the cliff plateau, covered in blood. The edge of the giant pit was full of steep cliffs. The cliffs cut a very deep hole in the wilderness and then extended and finally converged in the distance. It was very shocking to see. The autumn wind had yet to rise in the wilderness. Not far away, there was a lonely Bodhi tree. Its green leaves were still round and motionless. However, there was a trail of smoke near the cliff. The so-called smoke and dust were actually countless dust particles and pebbles moving at an unimaginably high speed in the space next to the cliff. They looked like countless, extremely thin threads. However long the cliff was, this streak of smoke was as long as the cliff. It stretched for thousands of li without a beginning or end in sight. It surrounded the world below the cliff like a miracle. It was unknown why it appeared. Amidst the smoke and dust, thousands of figures could be vaguely seen. In fact, it was not that they could be seen, but because those figures were moving too fast, even faster than what the naked eye could see. Those figures could overlap in countless places in an instant, creating this illusion. Among the thousands of figures, there were only two people who kept chasing each other. Suddenly, the melodious sound of a bell came from the distant giant peak. The thousands of miles of smoke and dust at the edge of the cliff suddenly stopped, and then slowly fell back to the plains. Where the smoke and dust settled, two people showed up. The scholar in a cotton-padded jacket had a cloth belt around his waist, and there was an inconspicuous wooden stick in it. He looked gentle and dusty, but extremely clean. He was the eldest brother of the academy. The middle-aged scholar opposite him had a flagon tied to his waist. He was the drunkard. Hundreds of white threads seeped out of the eldest brother's cotton-padded jacket and dragged for thousands of feet. They were gently fluttering in the autumn wind. It was very elegant, but inevitably looked a little weird. The pursuit in the distanceless state was too fast. The eldest brother's cotton-padded jacket was not ordinary. It did not tear in such a high-speed movement. However, the cotton in the interlayer of the jacket was squeezed out of the fine holes in the cotton cloth and became the thinnest cotton thread. Hundreds of cotton threads were fluttering behind him. It was indeed a little hard to describe, especially as the wind gradually changed. Some of the cotton threads fell on his face, which looked even more funny or even cute. The drunkard took down the flagon and drank endlessly. He was still relaxed after such a long pursuit in the distanceless state, but his hand holding the flagon was slightly trembling. The eldest brother looked at him, drinking without saying a word. When he was a little tipsy, the drunkard put down the flagon and looked at him with mixed feelings. He said, "Li Man, you have become faster, but you are still not as fast as me." The eldest brother smiled gently and said, "You did not catch up with me." The drunkard was silent for a moment, and then asked, "Why?" There were many whys in the world, at least more than 100,000 whys. What he wanted to ask was, of course, why the academy was against the Buddhism sect, because it meant that they were on the side of Hao Yin. In fact, I sometimes ask myself the same question. The eldest brother thought for a moment and then said, "I figured it out later." The youngest brother and Hao Yin were trapped in the chessboard, and they were in such a relationship. So if we want the youngest brother to come out, we have to save Hao Yin. We are not against the Buddhism sect, nor do we want to be friends with Hao Yin. We just want to save people. For the academy, saving people was always the most important thing, whether it was to save humans or to save the youngest brother. As for the pros and cons, they had to put aside for now. Once they started to consider the pros and cons, the academy would no longer be the academy. The drunkard frowned slightly and asked, "What is the academy trying to do?" The eldest brother said with a smile, "The master has his own ideas, and so do your disciples. What the academy is trying to do may seem ridiculous to you, but should be interesting." The drunkard said, "The Buddha also has his own plan. He has waited for countless years until Hao Yin is weakened by the academy. When she and the mortals enter the knowing destiny state, it is probably the only and last hope for the academy to represent human beings. How can you destroy it?" The eldest brother shook his head and said, "The academy has never thought about representing human beings. We are just doing what we think is beneficial to human beings, and we do it ourselves first. The drunkard said, "Then why do you want to stop the Buddhism sect from killing Haotian?" The eldest brother said, "First of all, it is the same reason I told you before. We want to save people. Secondly, Haotian is in the divine kingdom, so Sang Sang cannot be killed. Sang Sang was Haotian, and Haotian was Sang Sang. But Sang Sang was in the human world, and Haotian was in the divine kingdom. If the two existences could not be wiped out at the same time, Haotian would never be killed." The eldest brother said again, "If so, the Buddhism sect can't kill Haotian by killing Sang Sang. Instead, it will make her disappear and return to the divine kingdom. Haotian will become more powerful." It sounded hard to understand, but it was easy for people like the drunkard and the eldest brother to understand. That was why the academy had never figured out why the drunkard did it. The drunkard remained silent. The eldest brother understood and sighed. "Is that what the Abbey Dean is thinking?" The drunkard looked up at the gray sky and said, "Yes. Sang Sang could be killed or awakened by the Buddha's ordeal. Either way, she could return to the divine kingdom of Haotian." That was what the Abbey Dean was thinking. Abbey Dean. The eldest brother realized that no words were suitable to describe the Abbey Dean. He said, "It seems that the chessboard could really kill her." The drunkard said, "She will definitely die." That was the Abbey Dean's judgment. Even though he was a disabled man now, both the drunkard and the eldest brother knew that his judgment was correct. The eldest brother looked at the mountain in the distance quietly and then pulled out the wooden stick from his waist. He didn't know how to fight before, so he never carried a weapon. Later on, he was forced to learn how to fight in the Pamir Mountains, so he broke the water ladle that he always carried with him. When he was chasing the Abbey Dean that year, he picked up a wooden stick on the beach of a small island in the South Sea. From that day on, the stick became his weapon. The stick was left by the headmaster in the human world. The eldest brother pulled out the stick, which meant that he was ready to fight. In other words, he was ready to risk his life. The Abbey Dean said that Sang Sang would definitely die in the Buddha's chessboard. Then Ning Kei, who was connected to her in life, would definitely die as well. As Ning Kei's senior brother, the eldest brother naturally had to risk his life. Everyone in the cultivation world knew that people in the academy were good at risking their lives. When they risked their lives, everyone would be afraid. Not only the famous crazy coup of the last generation, but also the current generation. When Jun Mo risked his life, the army couldn't move forward and the Yellow River flowed backward. When Yu Lien risked her life, she dared to fly up to the sky and cut off the rainbow. As for the most terrifying one, it was Mr. First of the academy. The eldest brother was very gentle and rarely got angry, let alone risking his life. But the more gentle he was, the more terrifying he would be when he really risked his life. The Abbey Dean was the most powerful man in the human world when he was at his peak state. But even he couldn't do anything when facing the eldest brother who risked his life. The drunkard didn't want to stop him either. The drunkard turned sideways to avoid the stick. The eldest brother pointed at the giant peak and said, "Senior, aren't you worried that I'll leave like this?" The drunkard said calmly and confidently, "You're not as fast as me. I can catch up with you." The eldest brother said, "You've been chasing me for 3 months, but you still haven't caught up with me." The drunkard smiled and said, "As long as you don't enter the Shinkong temple, why should I catch up with you?" The eldest brother also smiled and said, "Senior, haven't you noticed that we've been standing opposite to each other? That's because I've been moving backward. If I turn around, can you still catch up with me?" The drunkard's expression suddenly changed. On the field by the cliff, the autumn wind suddenly whistled and a thunder-like sound was heard. A mass of airwaves spread to all directions and formed a huge hole. Hundreds of white cotton threads were falling in the wind. The eldest brother disappeared. The next moment, he appeared on the cliff plateau under the pear tree. Almost at the same time, Junimo also came to the cliff plateau, covered in blood. Junimo looked at the eldest brother under the tree and nodded. The eldest brother and the junior brother hadn't seen each other for a long time. They didn't talk about the old days, but looked at the same place. On the broken temple in the cliff plateau, there was a white pagoda. In front of the white pagoda, an old monk sat cross-legged. In front of the old monk, there was a chessboard. Yesterday, I said I would write 3 chapters today, but I really can't do it anymore. Just 1 chapter. If I'm in a better state of mind tomorrow, I'll try to make up for it. Sorry. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 962. A spider web fell from the eaves of the white pagoda and covered the old monk's head and body. The old monk closed his eyes and looked calm. His silver eyebrows fluttered in the wind and touched the spider web in front of him, as if they were 2 pieces of silk in the web. If one didn't look carefully, they couldn't be distinguished at all. Although the old monk closed his eyes, it gave people a feeling that his eyes were still on the world and were fixed on the seemingly ordinary chessboard in front of him. The old monk was naturally the chief monk of scripture of Xiankong Temple. Since Ning Ke and Sang Sang entered the chessboard, he had never left the chessboard. He watched the spring leaves, summer flowers, autumn fruits, and winter snow in the mountains, and listened to the morning bells and evening drums in the temple. Regardless of the wind and rain, he remained silent. Jun Mo came to the cliff and looked at the eldest brother under the pear tree. He walked directly to the old monk and raised the iron sword in his hand to chop at the chessboard. The wide and straight iron sword chopped heavily on the chessboard, making a deafening noise. Dust splashed on the cliff plateau. When the dust settled, the chessboard was still lying quietly in front of the old monk's knees. There was no trace left on the chessboard, not even a tremble. With Junmo's powerful cultivation state, the iron sword could probably cut off a stone mountain. Unexpectedly, it couldn't shake the chessboard at all. The chessboard could withstand the power of the iron sword, but the cliff plateau couldn't. With a clear, cracking sound, several cracks appeared on the cliff plateau. The cracks were dark and deep, probably hundreds of feet deep into the mountain. These cracks spread to the edge of the cliff and finally broke the cliff wall onto the pear tree. Years ago, the splashing water on the chessboard turned into several large waterfalls. Although the water had no source, it kept flowing down the cliff. Until now, it was finally cut off by Junmo's sword. One sword could break the waterfall, but not the chessboard. Jun Mo looked at the chief monk behind the chessboard and raised the iron sword in his hand again. The chief monk still closed his eyes, as if he didn't know the existence of the iron sword. His hands fell on the chessboard. Was the Vajra of the chessboard his trick? Jun Mo couldn't be sure, and he didn't need to be sure. He raised the iron sword and chopped down again. But this time it was not the chessboard, but the chief monk. Before the sword fell, the wind came first. The iron sword easily tore the seemingly troublesome cobwebs and fell on the chief monk's head, among the solemn precept scars. The iron sword was thick, and the chief monk's head was round. Therefore, Junimo didn't look like chopping with a sword, but more like hitting with a stick. Another loud crash sounded. The cold wind blew on the cliff plateau, and the pear tree swayed. The pear tree shook. The pear tree shook. The pear tree shook. The pear tree shook. The chief monk closed his eyes and still looked calm, but his silver eyebrows fluttered a little crazily, like a kasaya on a drying line in the wind. It was hard to guess where the sleeves and the hem of the clothes would flutter. The iron sword didn't leave any mark on his head, let alone a wound. He didn't bleed either. The chief monk's body had become Buddha, and his body and mind were both indestructible. To him, Ninkei's primordial 13 arrows were like straws, and Junmo's iron sword was just a wooden stick. However, he suddenly became shorter. The reason why he became shorter was that his body had sunk into the surface of the cliff platform. He was still sitting cross-legged and had sunk only a few inches, but the iron sword had still sunk a little. Jun Mo still didn't speak. He raised the iron sword in his hand and prepared to chop down again. At this moment, the wind on the cliff became slightly turbulent. Eldest brother came to his side. This was what it meant to stand shoulder to shoulder. Jun Mo withdrew his iron sword because his eldest brother was holding a wooden stick in his hand. The eldest brother walked to the chief monk with the wooden stick in his hand and knocked on him. His movement was a bit slow, and the stick seemed to knock very lightly. However, When the wooden stick fell on the chief monk's head, a sound that was even more horrible than the sound made by Junmo's iron sword was heard. With a boom, countless cracks appeared on the white pagoda behind the chief monk, which looked like the previous spiderweb. The copper bell hanging on the eaves rang crisply and then exploded into pieces. The chief monk still had his eyes closed. His silver eyebrows fluttered in the wind, and his face became slightly pale. His body sunk half a foot deep into the cliff platform. Although he had sunk, the chief monk was not really hurt. The chessboard under his hand sunk deeper into the cliff platform and became more solid. The eldest brother sighed. It still can't be broken. Junmo raised the iron sword and said, "Just keep smashing it." At this moment, a breeze rose on the cliff platform, and the fragrance of wine overflowed. The drunkard came to the platform and looked at the eldest brother in silence. Junmo looked back at him and said, "Do you want to stop us?" The drunkard said, "I don't want to risk my life." The academy's second-year students were present at the same time. Even he had to risk his life. However, the eldest brother felt a bit confused and asked, "Aren't you worried that we will take the chessboard away?" The drunkard said, "The chief monk is as strong as Vajrabhati. Even I and the butcher can't break it. Neither can you. So why should I worry?" Junmo didn't say anything more. He turned around and waved the iron sword to chop the chief monk's head again. There was another loud bang. The cracks on the white pagoda became deeper, and so did the cracks on the cliff platform. Many cracks also appeared on the stone walls in the cliff cave. The whole world seemed to be falling apart, but the chief monk was still the same. "Senior brother, it's your turn." Junmo stepped back and gave the position to the eldest brother. Looking at the chessboard that had sunk completely into the cliff platform, the eldest brother thought for a while and said, "I won't smash it." The drunkard smiled. Junmo frowned slightly. The eldest brother looked at him and said with a smile, "We try to pry it open." Junmo suddenly remembered something that happened many years ago in the back mountain of the academy. At that time, he and the eldest brother had just entered the academy and were still very young. They were ordered by the headmaster of academy to repair the mountain path in the back mountain. They encountered a rock that had fallen from the cliff, which was very troublesome. When Junmo was young, he was prouder, more confident, and more stubborn than he was now. He held a mountain-splitting axe and kept smashing the big rock for 3 days and 3 nights. In the end, his perlicue was bleeding, and his body was so exhausted that he could barely lift his mountain-splitting axe. However, only a small part of the rock had been smashed away. When he was smashing the rock, the eldest brother did nothing but watched. He knew that the eldest brother was a little weak, but he was still a little angry because of his helplessness. No matter how angry he was, Junmo wouldn't blame the eldest brother, let alone speak ill of him. So he felt very wronged. He didn't know why, but he just cried. The eldest brother looked at the huge rock for a long time. When he found that little Junmo was crying, he looked at him for a long time. Then he left without saying anything. The eldest brother left so heartlessly. Of course, Junmo wouldn't cry anymore. Who was he crying for? He washed his face with the cold stream water and recovered some energy. He picked up the axe again and was ready to continue smashing. At this time, the eldest brother came back with a dozen of tough, big bamboo in his arms. His forehead was covered with sweat. It was very hard for him to drag these bamboos down. The eldest brother stuffed the bamboo into the gap between the rock and the cliff. He calculated and confirmed that it was accurate. Then he called Junmo to him and said, "Pry it." Junmo had always listened to the eldest brother. Although he didn't understand what the eldest brother wanted to do and what the bamboo was for, he still did as he was told. The huge rock was smashed by the mountain-splitting axe for 3 days and 3 nights without being smashed. Then when Junmo went to pry it, he found that the rock soon loosened and then rolled down the mountain path, becoming a scenery in the mountain stream. Many years had passed, but Junmo still listened to the eldest brother. Since the eldest brother asked him to pry it, he would do it. He walked to the front of the chief monk and stabbed the iron sword into it. The iron sword was not between the chief monk's body and the cliff plateau, but was stabbed into the edge of the chessboard. The drunkard's expression changed slightly. Junmo waved the iron sword to pry it out. The chi of heaven and earth on the cliff plateau was in chaos. The wind was howling. The stones on the surface of the white pagoda were peeled off and hit the chief monk's head, splashing smoke and dust. The chief monk was still standing there. The chessboard was still in the cliff plateau. The iron sword was bearing an unimaginable weight. It was like a real mountain. Junimo was going to pry the mountain up. A clear whistle burst out from his lips. It was as bright as a phoenix and as powerful as a landslide. The flagon on the drunkard's waist floated up slightly. The eldest brother stood in front of him with his back to him. In the clear whistle, the iron sword in Junmo's hand slightly bent and then straightened. His sword was always straight. Even a mountain couldn't bend it. There was an unimaginable power between the bending. The chessboard was finally pried up and slowly rose to the ground. The chief monk's silver eyebrows fluttered. He suddenly turned over his hands and pressed them on the chessboard. The mountain fell on the chessboard again. Junmo's clear whistle stopped abruptly. He shouted like thunder, "Up!" The cliff wall collapsed. The pear tree shook, and the green leaves fell like rain. The chessboard was up. The chief monk's hand was on the chessboard. He was still sitting cross-legged. The iron sword was strong and straight. However, the chessboard and the chief monk were as heavy as the Prajna mountain. Even if the chessboard was lifted, it could only make a small gap. The gap was thinner than a hair. Even the smallest ant couldn't climb in. But it was enough. The gap meant that the chessboard and the mountain had been separated. The chessboard and the mountain were separated, but not from the chief monk's hand. Then, it was the eldest brother's business. He didn't know when his hand had fallen on the shoulder of the chief monk. On the cliff plateau, the airflow burst out, making a buzzing sound like a bell or a chime. In front of the white pagoda, only Junimo was standing with the iron sword. The eldest brother, the chief monk, and the chessboard had all disappeared. Where did they go? They went to the sky. Although the giant mountain was majestic and tall and could be called the first peak in the world, it was deep underground. Therefore, if seen from the surface, the peak was only a little higher than the wilderness. The sky was much higher than the peak. There were white clouds floating in the blue sky. Two people appeared in the white clouds. The eldest brother let go of his hand. The chief monk broke through the clouds and fell to the ground. The first update. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 963. On the cliff plateau, the drunkard looked up at the sky with a solemn expression. He had already been shocked when Yi Futian had gotten rid of him in the wilderness. Now that he saw this scene, he was even more shocked. The realm that Yi Futian had displayed had far surpassed the level he had displayed during the battle in Chang'an. It had even exceeded his imagination. Li Man, do you really want to be the fastest one? The flagon trembled in the autumn wind and the aroma spread. The drunkard's figure suddenly turned illusory and was about to break the space and go to the ninth heaven to help the chief monk. He didn't make a move just now because he believed that Li Man and Junimo couldn't do anything to the chief monk because of his Vajra body. But the fact overturned his speculation. Junimo used the iron sword to pry the chief monk and the chessboard off the cliff plateau. Li Man took the chief monk and the chessboard to the sky. Many people fell from the cliff, but few fell from the sky. A few years ago in Chang'an City, there were 3 people who fought from the ground to the sky and then fell from the sky. The final result was that Yu Lian, the most powerful person in the Devil's Doctrine, was also seriously injured. What about the chief monk? The chief monk was falling from the clouds to the ground with the chessboard in his arms. His body had become Buddha and was as solid as the earth. What would happen if he met the real earth? The drunkard was not as confident as before. He couldn't watch the chief monk get hurt. Most importantly, he couldn't watch the academy take the chessboard away. So he was ready to make a move. Right at this moment, an iron sword pierced through the air and slashed at his face. Junimo drew his sword. He knew that the drunkard was very powerful, so he used his right hand. The iron sword was rolled up by his right sleeve and chopped at the drunkard. Although his hand was not there, the sword and the intent were still there. The drunkard didn't know that Junimo had recovered so much after a year of fighting in the underground wilderness. He slightly raised his eyebrows, and his palms appeared in front of him without any movement. His state was much higher than Junmo's, but he was cautious and used the immeasurable Buddhism. The wine was immeasurable, the longevity was immeasurable, the intent was immeasurable, and the power of Buddha was immeasurable. The drunkard's palms were like two mountains closing together and clamped Junmo's iron sword. Junmo's iron sword felt as if it was being crushed by a mountain. He couldn't move it, nor could he pull it out. In fact, he had never thought of withdrawing his sword. He knew that he was still far from the drunkard, but he did not care because he was not fighting alone today. The autumn wind blew on the plateau again. The cotton-padded jacket with dozens of thin white lines appeared under the pear tree. In a flash, eldest brother returned to the field from the high sky. Without hesitation, he raised the wooden stick in his hand and smashed it at the drunkard. He did not hit the drunkard's face or body. Although he had learned how to fight, and the wooden stick was not an ordinary weapon, his style was not tough enough. As long as the drunkard was not absolutely tough, the unfathomable state of the drunkard would have enough time to use the correct method to deal with the wooden stick in his hand. So he smashed the iron sword with his wooden stick. The iron sword in Junmo's hand. The wooden stick fell on the iron sword without a sound. It was like forging iron. Junmo's iron sword was an iron hammer. When it was suppressed by the drunkard, it also pressed the drunkard, who was a hard iron block, down. Then the wooden stick became the second iron hammer and fell. There was a dead silence on the plateau, and then a loud noise suddenly burst out. The autumn wind blew. The drunkard's mouth was bleeding, his hair was disheveled, and his face was pale. His hands and body were trembling, and he could no longer suppress the iron sword. He let out a strange howl and turned around to leave. His voice was old and unpleasant, like rusty bronzes rubbing against each other. His howl was even more unpleasant to the ears. It sounded like a rusty bronze that had been smashed flat. It sounded so miserable. The autumn wind blew on the plateau again, and the airflow dispersed. The drunkard disappeared without a trace. Junmo rolled up his right sleeve, and the iron sword flew back to his left hand. Eldest brother did not chase after the drunkard. He reached out his hand and grabbed Junmo's empty sleeve. The two also disappeared on the plateau. The battle on the plateau was very dangerous. It was hard to describe it in words, but it happened in a very short time. From the drunkard's rising, to Junmo's sword attack, to the eldest brother's return and the drunkard's escape, it was only a moment. When the battle on the plateau happened, the chief monk was still falling from the sky. Countless layers of clouds were broken. The silver eyebrows of the chief monk were blown to the sky by the wind, shaking and swaying like a military flag in the strong wind. But he still closed his eyes and looked calm. The Buddha's chessboard was held in his arms. The light in the underground field was dim, and the meadow was blown down by the wind. The eldest brother and Junmo appeared. A shrill howl came from the sky, as if a heavy object was falling at a high speed. They did not look at the sky, but at the field in front of them. The air seemed to be torn apart, and the temperature in the field suddenly rose. The heavy object finally fell on the ground and smashed into the meadow. The earth kept shaking, and countless black soil was lifted up. There was a huge pit in the field. It was thousands of feet wide and dozens of feet deep. The rocks at the bottom of the pit were all shattered and covered in the pit. It looked like a miniature sinkhole. The chief monk sat cross-legged at the bottom of the pit. His kasaya had long been broken into pieces, and his naked thin body was covered with mud and stone chips. He looked very embarrassed, but he still did not open his eyes, and there was no blood on his body. The Buddha's chessboard was still in his arms. The eldest brother and Junmo were at the edge of the pit. Junmo jumped into the pit indifferently. He rolled up the sword in his right sleeve and chopped at the chief monk's head again. The chief monk lowered his head and did not dodge. The iron sword fell, followed by the wooden stick. The gravel at the bottom of the pit was shaken up and floated in the air. The chief monk's face became paler. The mud and stone chips on his head were shaken up by the iron sword and became brighter. But there was still no blood. The wind blew at the bottom of the pit, and the gravel hanging in the air fell down. The drunkard appeared behind the two. The eldest brother turned around and came to the front of the drunkard. The drunkard raised his eyebrows and slapped with his palm. A shadow suddenly appeared at the bottom of the pit, as if something was covering the sky. The eldest brother raised his stick to the sky and stabbed at the palm that covered the sky. The palm didn't fall, and the stick didn't break. The eldest brother turned pale and quickly retreated. He retreated to the side of the chief monk and put his hand on the chief monk's shoulder again. Junmo's iron sword had pierced between the chief monk and the gravel at the bottom of the pit. With a long howl, countless blood splashed out from Junmo's body and hit on the cliff at the bottom of the pit. The body of the chief monk, which was as heavy as a mountain, was forcibly lifted up again. It was still only a little bit, but it was enough. The eldest brother and the chief monk disappeared again. The next moment, they came to the sky above the east peak. There were countless rugged rocks on the east peak, which were made by the hard cultivation of countless eminent monks of the Xiankong Temple. They were harder than steel and sharper than swords. The eldest brother wanted to know if the chief monk would bleed if he was smashed on these rocks. But the drunkard had already arrived. He didn't care about Junmo's iron sword. He flew to the sky with the distanceless state on the ground at the risk of injury, and came to the front of the eldest brother. The drunkard firmly believed that as long as he was willing to pay the price, there was no reason for him to be slower than the eldest brother. He had cultivated for tens of thousands of years. How could he be slower than a person who had only cultivated for dozens of years? The distanceless state couldn't really fly freely in the sky. It could only let him go from the ground to somewhere in the sky, or back to the ground, and he could only stay in the sky for a short time. The eldest brother carried the heavy chief monk to the sky, which was already very hard, and was falling to the east peak. He should let go of the chief monk, but it was meaningless for him to let go with the drunkard by his side. What else could he do if he didn't let go? In the cold wind, the eldest brother looked at the drunkard and suddenly smiled. The smile was not decisive, but it was a decisive invitation. He took the chief monk and flew to the cliff at the edge of the giant pit. He didn't really fly. He wanted to take the chief monk to the depth of the cliff. The depth of the cliff was the underground of the wilderness. The distanceless state relied on the turbulent layer of the chi of heaven and earth to move at a high speed. It reduced the distance between two places to a very short distance. There were turbulent layers in the tangible things. But since ancient times, the grand cultivators who could reach the distanceless state would never try to go through those passages, because it was very dangerous, and it meant that you might have to face countless cliffs in an instant. Those cliffs were not real cliffs, but the chi of heaven and earth between the cliffs. Would the drunkard dare to follow if the eldest brother did that? From the depth of the cliff, at the east of the giant pit, came a dull rumbling sound. On the field below the cliff, the farmers who were grazing and the nobles who were planning how to suppress the rebellious serfs all heard the sound. Countless people walked out of their tents and looked at the cliff in the distance. Their eyes were full of confusion. The rumbling sound became louder and louder, getting closer and closer to the surface of the cliff. All of a sudden, countless stones shot out from somewhere on the cliff and fell into the field and the lake below. The water splashed, the mud flew, and the cattle and sheep screamed uneasily. As the smoke and dust settled, a deep cave appeared on the cliff. The hole was very deep and went straight into the cliff for miles. Junmo stood at the bottom of the pit in the field and looked at the hole on the cliff in the distance. He frowned slightly and was a little worried. The drunkard landed beside him and said while looking at him, "Li Man Man is dead." A cough came from the bottom of the pit. The eldest brother appeared beside Junmo and looked at the drunkard. "I'm lucky. I'm not dead." There were many cuts on his cotton-padded jacket, and blood was seeping out. The drunkard looked at him with a confused expression and said, "How could you not die in such a way?" The eldest brother said, "The chief monk is in front. He can cut mountains and cut stones." After saying that, he pulled up Junmo's empty sleeve and disappeared on the spot. The next moment, the drunkard appeared above the cliff. He lowered his head and looked at the deep hole. His face turned pale because the hole had been blocked by stones. The marks were made by the iron sword. At the end of the cliff cave, which was more than 10 miles deep, there was no light at all. It was as dark as the eternal night. The eldest brother and June Mo stood in front of the chief monk. The chief monk still lowered his head and said nothing. June Mo did not say anything either. He walked to the front of the chief monk and raised the iron sword, ready to chop down. The eldest brother suddenly said, "Pry again." June Mo did not ask, because he understood. He directly stabbed the iron sword under the chief monk's body. The chief monk looked very miserable. He was covered with stone chips, and there were some faint sounds coming from his body. He hit the ground continuously and fell more than 10 miles deep into the wilderness. Even though he was an invincible Vajra, it was still hard for him to hold on. But he did not open his eyes or say anything. His expression was still calm. Until then, he finally reacted. He still did not open his eyes, but his lips were slightly trembling as if he was about to say something. It was strange. It was not the first time that June Mo tried to pry him off the ground. He had been indifferent before. Why did he suddenly react? June Mo did not pay attention to him. He poured all his domineering state into the iron sword. The chief monk moved his lips and said with an old and hoarse voice, "As I have heard." He was vigilant because he had guessed what the two from the academy were going to do. What the eldest brother and June Mo were going to do was definitely not to throw him down in the air like before. At this moment, the drunkard could not enter the cliff cave for the time being. The eldest brother and June Mo had more time, so they could try another method. Making him leave the ground was the premise of this method. So he had to move. He moved his lips and said the Buddha's words. He used the supreme Dharma access of words to obey. But how could the eldest brother not know what he would do? When the 4 words of "as I have heard" were just sounded in the dark cliff cave, another sentence followed. Confucius said. As Confucius said, it was the Buddha's words. The cliff cave was in silence. June Mo screamed. His body was covered with sweat and blood. He looked like a bloody man. His iron sword finally pried the chief monk off the ground once again. The eldest brother stretched out his hands and held the chief monk's shoulders as if to ensure his balance. He did nothing. In fact, he had taken the chief monk far away in a flash. They walked in the cliff cave within an inch. The eldest brother took the chief monk and went back and forth within an inch. Anyway, he did not want the chief monk to touch the ground. The eldest brother's cotton-padded jacket was bleeding again. Such intensive distanceless state had caused great damage to him. The chief monk was as solid as the earth. If he was separated from the ground, he would be weak. His face was slightly pale. June Mo's iron sword had fallen on the chief monk's head. There was a clear sound, like metal and stone colliding. A drop of red blood flowed out of the chief monk's head. The most powerful Vajra body of the Buddhism sect was finally broken by the eldest brother and June Mo. However, it was just a drop of blood. The eldest brother and June Mo had paid such a high price to make the chief monk bleed a drop of blood. If it was seen by others, it was not worth it, and they might even feel desperate. If they kept hacking like this, how many times would they need to hack the chief monk until he was seriously injured? How many years would they need to hack him? But people in the academy would never think so. June Mo held the iron sword and hacked the chief monk's head again and again, as if he would never feel tired. The eldest brother held the chief monk's shoulders and looked calm, as if he would never feel tired. So what if his body became Buddha? As long as he started to bleed, it meant that he would continue to bleed. No matter how many years it would take, as long as he kept hacking, he would be hacked to death. That was what June Mo thought. Eldest senior brother thought so too. And when the two of them wanted to do the same thing, there were very few times when that thing could not be done. We have 2 computers. My wife can enter the author's section, but I can't. It's a problem of my character. This is the 2nd chapter for 1,000 words. There are 2 more chapters. To be continued. If you like this work, you are welcome to vote for me and vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 964. Many years ago, in the autumn rain at the Lang Temple, Yi Su, the world wayfarer of Haotian Taoism, Qin Yin, the world wayfarer of Buddhism and the most powerful sword in the human world, could do nothing to them. They could only watch the Buddha statue collapse. Today, outside the Shinkong Temple in the West Wilderness, they could beat the chief monk of Scripture, the Buddha in the human world, in front of the drunkard, such a powerful cultivator, and even broke the chief monk's Vajra body. Because they were very strong, and because they cooperated perfectly, because they had a natural tacit understanding, which represented absolute trust and confidence. Only the academy could cultivate such temperament, and only the headmaster of academy could teach such disciples. When they fought side by side, even heaven would feel afraid, not to mention the enemy. After Jun Mo had chopped the iron sword for the umpteenth time, the chief monk of Scripture finally opened his eyes. A thin stream of blood flowed from the top of his head into his eyes, and his sight was bloody. The chief monk felt very painful, really painful. He also found that the two disciples of the academy were really going to keep chopping forever. He didn't want to die yet, because he hadn't seen Buddha reappear in the human world. So he had to do something, although he knew the consequences. The iron sword fell again. The chief monk loosened his hand holding the chessboard and put one hand in front of him. He raised it a little high, just in front of the iron sword. The chief monk's hand didn't hold the iron sword, because the moment he let go, the eldest brother also let go of the iron sword. He held the wooden stick and smashed it heavily on the chief monk's mouth between his thumb and index finger. The wooden stick didn't want to snatch food from the tiger's mouth, but to feed the tiger with its own body. The chief monk suddenly felt suffocated. His hand, wrist, and chest trembled uneasily. His Vajra body made a cracking sound, as if it would break in the next moment. He had only wanted to stretch out one hand, because he could stop Junmo's iron sword with one hand. Unexpectedly, it was the wooden stick that came to him. He could not understand. Could the two from the academy see through the minds of humans? The eldest brother and Jun Mo couldn't see through others' thoughts, but they could know each other's thoughts without talking. So the iron sword didn't fall, but the wooden stick came. Jun Mo's iron sword fell down and chopped at the chessboard in the arms of the chief monk. No matter how chaotic the chief monk's Zen heart was, he couldn't stop the wooden stick. There was a clear ringing sound, as if a tiny porcelain cup had fallen to the ground. Suddenly, an extremely bright light appeared in the dark cave. It was the light of heaven. An extremely deep crack extended from the depths of the plains to the ground. Then the earth shook and the cliff collapsed. Countless rocks and dirt flew out. On the east side of the sinkhole, a gap of more than 10 miles long appeared. The scene was extremely shocking. In the opening of the sinkhole, there were innumerable ant nests, rat holes, roots of autumn grass, and stolen fruits. There was a thin stream of water between the rocks, gradually wetting the rocks. The chief monk sat among the rubble. His face was covered with dust and blood. He looked very miserable. The chessboard in his arms had already been taken away by Jun Mo's iron sword. The drunkard stood at the edge of the collapsed cliff and looked at the scene. His expression suddenly changed. Jun Mo had returned to the state before the Verdant Canyon, and Li Manman's state had improved rapidly. This made him extremely shocked and vigilant. However, he still didn't expect that these two could actually break the Vajra body of the chief monk and take away the chessboard. The chief monk looked at the eldest brother and Jun Mo with a sad expression, but also a sense of loss and relief. His voice was as low as a bell, and he said with pity, "It's useless." "What's useless?" "Even if you get the chessboard, it's useless. You can't open the chessboard and save Hao Yin and Ning K from inside, because it's a celestial instrument left by Buddha. If it didn't rot in the Lang Temple, it would never rot. It had already surpassed the rules of time and was truly Vajrabhati." The eldest brother glanced at the chessboard in Junmo's hand and said nothing. He reached out and grabbed Junmo's sleeve. The two disappeared and returned to the green tree by the cliff plateau. The next moment, the autumn wind blew again. The drunkard also returned to the cliff plateau with the chief monk of Scripture. The chief monk sat in front of the white pagoda and looked at the two under the tree. He said with pity, "It's really useless." Jun Mo ignored him. He picked up the iron sword and chopped at the chessboard. The eldest brother stood in front of the chessboard with a pale face. It was obvious that his psyche power had been greatly consumed, but he just stood there. Neither the drunkard nor the chief monk wanted to try. The sound of the iron sword falling on the chessboard kept ringing on the cliff plateau. It was clear and decisive, and it was completely different from the bell in the temple. There were countless soldiers and horses in the midst of it. Jun Mo waved the iron sword and kept chopping. No one knew how many times he had chopped and how much time had passed. The sound echoed among the cliffs, as if the army was vowing to attack the city. The Buddha city was hard to break. Jun Mo kept chopping until his fingers were bleeding. His expression didn't change. Every time he waved the sword, he was still so meticulous to make sure that he could exert the greatest power. The chief monk looked at the scene in silence and did nothing. So the drunkard did nothing either. He just watched quietly, and the more he watched, the more complicated his mood became. He should have known that there was no hope, but he still kept doing it. It even gave the onlookers the illusion that the iron sword could chop out hope from despair. What kind of mind did he have? How could the headmaster of the academy teach such a disciple? Where did he find such a disciple? Jun Mo suddenly stopped, not because he was tired, although he was really tired, but because one side of the iron sword had been deformed. The edgeless sword blade had become flat. The iron sword was indestructible. Before the Verdant Canyon, it had chopped countless swords. Even Lu Bai's sword had been broken by the iron sword. But today it was deformed in front of the chessboard. He looked at the chief monk of scripture and asked, "If it's really useless, why did you watch the chessboard on the cliff plateau for a whole year? You didn't dare to leave it no matter what happened." The chief monk said, "I watched it for a year because I wanted to watch it." The two watch in the beginning and the end of the sentence could have different pronunciations and meanings. The first watch was to guard, and the second watch was to see or to watch. The eldest brother asked, "What do you want to watch?" The chief monk's silver eyebrows fluttered in the autumn wind. He said, "To watch Buddha and all living beings." Jun Mo didn't understand. He shook his head, changed the side of the iron sword in his hand, and continued to chop the chessboard. The chief monk's expression changed slightly, and the drunkard's expression became more and more serious. They didn't expect that Jun Mo stopped not because he gave up, but because he wanted to change the side of the iron sword in his hand. So even if the iron sword was really broken, he would change another side and continue to chop. The eldest brother suddenly said, "Buddha's chessboard can't be cut, and Hao Yin can't be killed." The drunkard looked at him and wanted to stop him from continuing, but he thought for a while and didn't move. The eldest brother continued. Even if Buddha destroyed her existence in the chessboard, he could only turn her back into a pure rule and naturally return to the divine kingdom. What's the point of doing that? The chief monk put his palms together and said, "Buddha could foresee the past 5,000 years and the future 5,000 years. He could foresee the past when he was alive and the future when he was dead. Naturally, he could foresee what happened today." The eldest brother said calmly, "The headmaster thought for 1,000 years and finally came up with a way to keep her in the human world. Could Buddha foresee the headmaster's means? Could Buddha foresee the youngest brother's ability? Or could Buddha foresee that Hao Yin was divided into two by the academy? No, Buddha couldn't foresee anything." His tone was normal, and his expression was calm, but he was confident. Even Hao Yin couldn't foresee what the academy did, let alone Buddha. The chief monk understood, so he kept silent for a long time. The drunkard had heard the Abbey Dean talk about it in the stone room of the divine halls of West Hill. So he knew it long ago, and that was why he came here to help the Buddhism sect. Buddha set a game of life and death for Hao Yin, but he couldn't foresee that Hao Yin had become two. In the eldest brother's words, what was the point of the game? Pointless. In a very short time, the chief monk became much older because he knew the intention of Taoism and admitted that the academy was right and Buddha's game was pointless. If there was only one Hao Yin, then Buddha's chessboard could only kill Sang Sang and then suppress her forever so that she couldn't return to the divine kingdom and be resurrected. But now there were two Hao Yin. Even if Buddha could kill Sang Sang, How could he prevent the rules she turned into after her death from connecting with the world? How Ian was still there, and rules were naturally connected, and nothing could stop it. After death, Sang Sang would definitely return to the divine kingdom, which was the ending the Abbey Dean wanted. Pointless. The chief monk looked at Jun Mo, who was still cutting the chessboard, and repeated the 4 words again. What you're doing is also pointless. This is Buddha's chessboard. As long as Buddha doesn't allow them to return, they will never be able to. As for whether Hao Yin the chessboard is alive or dead, and whether she will return to the divine kingdom after her death, it depends on the fate of Buddha or the will of heaven. Before that, mortals like us are pointless. The bell between the peaks was still ringing. Many monks came to the cliff plateau, but they didn't dare to go forward. Hearing this, they all bowed with their palms pressed together. Qin Yin and the 3rd elder of Commandment Yard also came. In this battle between the Academy and Xiankong Temple, it seemed that the Academy had the upper hand. But as long as the Academy couldn't open the chessboard, it was destined to lose. Junimo finally stopped and suddenly said, "If we can't open it, then we will go in." The eldest brother smiled and said, "That makes sense." The chief monk said, "Not everyone can enter it." The eldest brother said, "Chief monk, have you ever wondered why we didn't leave, but came to the cliff plateau, since we have a chessboard?" The chief monk's silver eyebrows slightly fluttered, as if he had noticed something. The eldest brother looked at the green tree and reached out to touch the leaves. He said, "Is this the pear tree?" The chief monk was silent. Qin Yin and the other monks behind the green vines slightly changed their expressions. The eldest brother said, "I heard that this pear tree blooms every 500 years, bears fruit every 5 days, and falls to the ground every 5 minutes. It touches the ground and drifts with the current, never to be seen again. It's really amazing." The drunkard said, "This tree blooms and bears fruit a year ago." The eldest brother sat down against the green tree and said, "If so, then I will wait for another 499 years. When it blooms and bears fruit, I will go in the chessboard to find it." Junimo picked up the chessboard and sat down under the tree. Chapter 3, and then go to have a meal. Chapter 4 will be later. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 965. Even if he had to wait for another 500 years, he would continue to wait. Listening to the morning bell and evening drum, watching the spring breeze and autumn rain, silently waiting for time to pass. There would definitely be a time when the pear blossom tree would bloom like snow. What kind of perseverance was this? What kind of spirit was this? Looking at the 2 under the pear tree, the chief monk remained silent for a long time. He did not expect that the Academy would even know the biggest secret of the Buddhism sect. That seemingly ordinary scholar was indeed, as the rumors said. He was well-read and knowledgeable. No matter what field he was in, he could be the best. The drunkard walked to the other side of the cliff, untied the flagon, and began to drink. He looked at the distant sky silently. What he needed to do was to help Hao Yin Taoism send Hao Yin back to the divine kingdom. It would take at least 500 years for the chessboard to open, but he was not worried at all. What he was best at was fighting against time. The chief monk said, 500 years is a long time, enough for a lot of things to happen in the human world. Taoism won't miss this opportunity if you wait under the pear tree. But what about the Academy? What about the Tang Empire? No wonder he was the chief preaching monk of the Xiankong Temple and the Buddha on earth of this generation. His simple words made everyone silent. Eldest brother and Jun Mo would wait under the pear tree for 500 years. Who would guard Chang'an? This green tree was planted by Buddha himself countless years ago. It was a slender sapling back then, but now it's difficult to encircle it with 2 palms. When you come again 500 years later, perhaps the green tree will have reached the sky. What the chief monk said was rather sentimental, but it was also a suggestion. Jun Mo said, "If the pear tree is not in front of us, the Academy will not be at ease." The chief monk said, "This pear tree is a sacred object left by Buddha. We must take good care of it." Jun Mo said, "Youngest brother is in the chessboard, so the Academy has to be careful. Moreover, you bald donkeys are the most shameless, fickle, hypocritical, and fanatical. I'm afraid that you will destroy the tree as soon as we leave." The Xiankong Temple monks behind the green vines had ugly expressions when they heard this. The chief monk said calmly, "What is the Academy going to do? There are more than 10,000 monks in the temple. All of them have firm Zen hearts. If they really want to seize it, do you think you could defend it for 500 years? Jun Mo ignored him and looked at eldest senior brother, asking, "Senior brother, is it possible?" Eldest brother thought about it and said, "That's feasible." Jun Mo didn't say anything specific, but he knew what Jun Mo was asking. So he slowly stood up, holding the wooden stick, and stood in front of the pear tree. Jun Mo stood up and adjusted his chi circulation for a moment. Then he stabbed the iron sword into the cliff plateau until the hilt slid down. The cliff was firm, and the iron sword went in silently. The drunkard had guessed what the two from the Academy were going to do. He raised his eyebrows in disbelief. Eldest senior brother was very gentle and kind. He to him to say, to his senior eldest, Zhou, and years later he said he too. Eldest senior brother's temperament was very gentle and kind. He did everything slowly and spoke softly. He was a most amiable person and rarely got angry. He had never threatened anyone before, so his threats were very powerful. It was just like how he rarely risked his life against others, so when he risked his life, everyone would be afraid. The drunkard frowned. What he wanted was true immortality. But it was not worth it to drive the Academy mad and kill him at all costs just for immortality. Before today, he did not believe that the Academy could kill him. But now he realized that it was not entirely impossible. Of course, even if the Academy could kill him, they would have to bury the Academy with them, or even the entire Tang Empire. Logically speaking, such a situation should not happen. But what if the Academy really went crazy? What if these people really wanted to kill him? The drunkard said, "Taoism invited me to the West Wilderness and asked me to pass on a message. I brought it here a year ago. I also tried to leave the chessboard in the Xiankong Temple. Since I failed, I will not do it again." Eldest senior brother said, "Thank you very much." He knew that the drunkard said so because he had confirmed that the chessboard left by Buddha could not be opened by external force. But he did not want to say it out. The drunkard could guess what the Academy wanted to do because he knew the headmaster of the Academy and Ku Haoren. He knew that the Academy looked elegant and peaceful, but it was actually a group of lunatics. The monks of the Xiankong Temple did not know the Academy well, so they could not guess what the Academy was going to do. They looked at the eldest senior brother who was standing in front of the pear tree and became nervous. The chief monk looked at Jun Mo and the sword in his hand. His expression suddenly changed. Jun Mo did not look at him. He held the sword hilt and shouted. The iron sword began to move on the cliff plateau. The movement of the iron sword was to cut. A horrible sound of friction was heard. Pebbles flew and dust rose. The iron sword moved around the pear tree and on the surface of the cliff plateau. Finally, it broke out of the cliff. A crack appeared on the ground of the cliff plateau. The eldest senior brother bent down and put his hand into the crack. Jun Mo asked again, "Senior brother, is it possible?" The eldest senior brother said, "It's a bit hard, but it's doable. What about you?" "I can't leave yet." Jun Mo held the iron sword and looked at the dark and cold underground field under the peak. He said, "There are many people who need me there." The eldest senior brother praised, "Younger brother, you are kind and brave." Jun Mo said, "I just want peace of mind." Eldest brother said, "Kindness is the only thing that can make one feel at ease. Courage is the only thing that can move forward." Being praised by the eldest senior brother, Jun Mo was still calm because he believed that he was worthy of the two words. He said, "I will send you off." The eldest senior brother said, "I will send you off." After saying this, his hand shook slightly. The crack on the cliff plateau suddenly widened. The sound of friction was loud. A large cliff plateau slowly left the mountain. The pear tree was on the cliff plateau. The mud and sand fell. Under the cliff plateau, the roots of the pear tree could be vaguely seen. This giant peak was the body of the Buddha. The cliff was so strong. Junmo's iron sword had cut a piece of the cliff, and now the eldest senior brother was going to leave with this cliff plateau. Seeing this, the monks of the Shinkong temple were shocked and speechless. They forgot what they were supposed to do. The eldest senior brother put the wooden stick into his waist and grabbed Junmo's sleeve. Then they disappeared. A piece of the cliff plateau was also missing. The gap of the cliff was extremely smooth. The green pear tree was also gone. The eldest senior brother and Junmo left just like that. They took away the chessboard left by the Buddha, the pear tree left by the Buddha, and even a piece of flesh from the Buddha's palm. The chief monk was silent with a pale face. The drunkard took a sip of wine and sighed. Lunatics. From the old to the young, they're all lunatics. The eldest senior brother sent Junmo back to the underground field and then returned to the academy. From this day on, there was a pear tree in the back mountain of the academy. There was a chessboard under the pear tree. Many people were watching the chessboard. They were so engrossed in it that they even forgot the passage of time. They didn't want to see the Buddha or the living beings in the chessboard. They just wanted to see how to open the chessboard and save the youngest brother from it. If I can study at the back of the mountain of the academy, I think it will be a very happy thing. It's really cool. For chapters have been completed. Today's update will definitely be very late, so I want to report to everyone in advance. I won't release separate chapters. First, I'm tired. Second, I have something to do in the afternoon and evening. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 966. The back mountain of the academy, especially near the Mirror Lake, was always like spring all year round. Moreover, the pear tree was unusual, so it didn't feel bleak at all. It was full of green leaves, casting a shade. They sat in the shade and stared at the chessboard for a long time. They still couldn't figure out what was so special about the chessboard, nor could they figure out a way to open it. Muyu used an embroidery needle to tidy up her hair and said angrily, "You still haven't figured out a way?" Fourth brother looked at the chessboard and said seriously, "I've thought of 73 ways. But since eldest brother and second brother can't open it, those methods won't work." Muyu said, "We have to try." They left the pear tree and came to the water drawing room by the stream. They saw fourth brother put the chessboard on the stove and let it be burned by the blue flame. Their expressions changed slightly. Beigong Weiyong held the zither and asked worriedly, "Even if the Buddha's chessboard won't be burned, will youngest brother be roasted in it?" Shimen Buhua pointed at the chessboard on the stove with his bamboo flute and said, "It's been burning for a long time, but it's still not black. This chessboard is not a barbecue plate, and youngest brother is not pork." Fourth brother didn't pay attention to them. After confirming that the chessboard had been burned to a very high temperature, he picked it up with iron tongs and threw it into the cold stream behind the blacksmith's room. There was a sizzling sound, and white mist appeared in the stream. The big white goose, who was squatting on the top of the water wheel and looking into the distance, was startled. It flapped its wings and flew to the stream. It was very dissatisfied with these people. Heat expansion and cold contraction was the best way to destroy a hard object. However, to the disappointment of the academy, the chessboard didn't change at all. Not even a crack appeared on it. In the following days, the people of the academy did many things to the chessboard. Muyu threw the chessboard into the tactical array of the Cloud Gate, trying to tear it apart, but to no avail. Wang Qi boiled a pot of the most poisonous and corrosive soup in the world, threw the chessboard into it, and cooked it for 3 days and 3 nights. In the end, most of the fish in the stream died, and the big white goose was so angry that it was sad, but the chessboard did not move. Fourth brother took out the small iron pot left by Ninkei in the back mountain and tried to blow up the chessboard, but only killed half of the fish in the Mirror Lake. The big white goose was so sad that he did not want to live, but the chessboard was still there. One day, fifth senior brother Song Qian suddenly said, "Speaking of the chessboard, I always feel that since it's used to play chess, it must be related to chess." He and his eighth brother were the best chess players in the world. When it came to playing chess, or the chessboard, there was no one more familiar with it than them. Everyone's eyes lit up, and they looked at him with hope. "Muyu asked then?" Song Qian touched his head and said, "Then, There's no then. Hearing this, everyone was angry. They thought that since he could not reason with them, why did he suddenly speak? Wang Qi was dealing with a pot of poisonous medicine, so he did not fully understand the situation. He took out 2 boxes of chess pieces from his yard and asked, "Then, where should we play the chess pieces?" They wanted to teach Wang Qi a lesson, but thinking that their youngest brother was in the chessboard, Chun Pippi was in Linkong, and 11 was the youngest in the academy, they held back their anger. Fourth senior brother thought for a moment, then took the chess box from his hand, and then poured all the chess pieces in the box onto the chessboard, only to hear the crisp sound of the chess pieces echoing continuously. The chessboard was full of black and white chess pieces. Everyone surrounded the chessboard and looked at it nervously. They even forgot to breathe. However, nothing happened. From the chessboard and the pear tree back to the back of the mountain of the academy, Sixth brother had not said a word. Until now, when everyone looked dejected and desperate, he stood up with a big iron hammer in his hand. He looked at them and said honestly, "We still have to smash it in the end." He looked at them and said honestly, "Let me do it." Muyu said, "Senior brothers didn't smash it in Xiankong Temple." Sixth brother said, "We have more time. We can keep smashing it." Fourth brother thought for a while and sighed. "It seems that we have no other choice." The quiet back of the mountain of the academy became noisy from that day on. There was a dull sound by the mirror lake. Sixth brother kept smashing the chessboard with the iron hammer. Although he was strong and had swung the iron hammer countless times in his life, he would eventually get tired. When he was tired, fourth brother and fifth brother would step up to replace him. Those who were obsessed with chess left their chessboards. Those who were obsessed with sand tables also left the sand tables. Those who were obsessed with arrays also left the arrays. They became hard-working blacksmiths beside Buddha's chessboard. Those who were obsessed with music didn't change. Beigong Weiyong and Shimen Buhua were too thin and weak. They tried twice but couldn't even lift the iron hammer. So they were driven aside. Looking at the scene of their fellow disciples working hard, the two of them couldn't help but feel a little disappointed. So they sat on the side and played an impassioned song to cheer for everyone and the guy on the chessboard. Bang! 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 The iron hammer kept falling on the chessboard. The ground of the cliff plateau at the back of the mountain was shaking. The fish that survived a few days ago hid in the water grass in fear. The big white goose stared at the chessboard curiously, wondering if the silly guy was in it. The little white wolf howled at the bright moon in the night sky in the depths of the forest. It wanted to learn the majestic manner of its father, but it was disturbed by the hammering sound coming from the foot of the mountain. Only the old yellow bull was calm. He sat on the meadow and ate the grass from time to time. Countless hammers fell on the chessboard, but the chessboard didn't calm down. Muyu's dinner was a little late. The brothers who were blacksmiths were hungry and dissatisfied. Some of them began to miss the girl who used to cook for them. She is Hao Yin. Of course, she can cook better than me. You want to eat? Then get her out of the chessboard. Muyu was very angry. She squatted down and looked at the chessboard. She said earnestly, "Little brother, when can you come out? Remember to bring your wife with you." In front of a famous Taoist temple in Linkong, Chun Pippi was teaching thousands of followers in the square. He looked calm, and his words were clear and definite. The autumn wind blew his Taoist robe and made it flutter. The chubby lad in the past did look like a messenger of Haoyin Taoism. Yisu had left the South Jin Kingdom, but the new stream that he founded in a shabby alley did not decline. Instead, it was flourishing at an unimaginable speed, because Chun Pippi was working hard to continue his cause, and with the help of the sword Garret, no one in the South Jin Kingdom dared to stop the preaching of the new stream. As for those stubborn Taoists and divine priests who were loyal to the divine halls of West Hill, they had already become corpses in the great swamp in the dark of night. The grand preaching and teaching was a reflection of the popularity of the new stream in the South Jin Kingdom. Among the thousands of believers, there were old and young, poor and rich people. Today, Chun Pippi was teaching the third volume of the West Hill Scriptures, which was originally abstruse and difficult to understand and could only be explained and defined by the divine priests. But with his calm voice, it became the simplest and clearest words. The original meaning of the Scriptures was not lost, but the interpretation was completely different from that of the divine halls of West Hill. After the preaching, thousands of believers bowed to Chun Pippi in front of the Taoist temple and then left. According to the requirements of the new stream, if they wanted to show their devotion to Hao Yin and the new stream, the first thing they had to do was to be kind to others and themselves and live a good life. It was a simple requirement, so it was really easy for the preaching of the new stream. It seemed that it was the same for any religion at the beginning. Under the protection of several disciples of the Sword Garret and the army of the South Jin Kingdom, Chun Pippi left the Taoist temple and walked to the alley where he lived. Along the way, the believers he met all respectfully gave way to him. When he returned to the shabby room in the alley, he looked at the disciple of the blind Sword Garret who was standing by the window. He took off his Taoist robe and complained, "It's so annoying to have so many people follow me every time." Lu Yiqing turned around. The sunlight seeped in from the window and illuminated the white cloth covering his eyes. He smiled and said, "I heard that since you sent people to follow you, you have gained more respect. I don't know if it's respect or fear." Chun Pippi wiped the sweat off his body with a wet towel. His white fat was trembling, and he looked nothing like the celestial being he was in front of the Taoist temple. Lu Yiqing said, "Respect, to a large extent, comes from fear, such as the attitude toward the divine halls." After a moment of silence, Chun Pippi threw the wet towel into the basin and said, "I know what you want to say. If the divine halls really want to kill me, you can't do anything about it." Any powerful organization was most afraid of internal division or internal challengers. Yisu's new stream was undoubtedly the one that the divine halls of West Hill were most wary of. The South Jin Kingdom was under great pressure from the divine halls of West Hill to hand Chun Pippi over. Lu Bai's death naturally made the Sword Garret and the divine halls of West Hill irreconcilable enemies. Of course, the South Jin Kingdom would not hand Chun Pippi over. The problem was that the divine halls of West Hill could send people to Lincoln at any time to kill Chun Pippi. Chun Pippi's ocean of chi and mountain of snow had been sealed, and he was no longer the cultivation genius he used to be. That was why the Sword Garret was so nervous and sent so many people to protect him. As far as I know, the divine halls secretly sent a red-robed divine priest to Lincoln. He has already met the one in the imperial palace. "I'm worried that the royal family of the South Jin Kingdom will change their attitude," said Lu Yiqing. Chun Pippi looked at him and said with a smile, "You have already killed an emperor. What's the harm in killing another one?" Lu Yiqing said bitterly, "I can't kill everyone from the South Jin Kingdom." After a moment of silence, Chun Pippi said, "Or we can leave." Lu Yiqing said, "What I want to ask is, when is the academy going to do it?" Chun Pippi walked to him and looked at the sunset outside the window. He said, "I think it should be soon." Lu Yiqing said, "Then I think the divine halls will do it soon." Chun Pippi said, "Yes, my father will definitely not miss this opportunity. Let's keep watching. We won't be disappointed in the end. There will be a surprise. I can't wait. This is the first chapter of today. I will continue to write. I'm really tired. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 967. Lu Yiqing asked when the academy would act, and he meant Qinghe Prefecture. As long as Qinghe Prefecture was conquered, the South Jin Kingdom would be united with the Tang Empire. It would be difficult for the West Hill Divine Palace to do anything. The West Hill Divine Palace's target was naturally the South Jin Kingdom. The South Jin Kingdom was powerful. Taoism would never give up the South Jin Kingdom if they wanted to defeat the Tang Empire. Moreover, the South Jin Kingdom had always been under the Divine Hall's control. Lu Yiqing was about to say something, but Tang Xiaodang came back from shopping. It was not appropriate for him to say more. He bowed to them and left with the disciples of the Sword Garret. Chun Pippi looked at the disciples of the Sword Garret disappearing in the dusk. He was silent for a long time. He knew that the South Jin Kingdom was under great pressure from the West Hill Divine Palace, especially recently. It was a secret to ordinary people that they were trapped in the chessboard by Buddha, but it was not a secret to him, who could keep in touch with the academy. Because of this sudden change, the academy had to adjust their original plan. Taoism, especially his father, would never miss such an opportunity. I've been cultivating Taoism since I was a child, and I've never had any obstacles. People in the Abbey praised me as a rare genius in Taoism. Later, I got 6 A+ grades in the academy and was directly summoned to the second floor by my teacher. I became a member of the back mountain of the academy and entered the knowing destiny state without knowing it. Cultivation is never difficult for me. Chun Pippi stood in front of the window and looked in the direction of Chang. He continued, maybe because of this, or because I don't want to compete with my senior brother for Taoism, I don't pay much attention to cultivation and am not interested in power. But now, I have become a useless person and can no longer cultivate. I can no longer have the same or even stronger power as before. But I suddenly want power. He wanted to do something for the academy. That was why he wanted power. Tang Xiaodang walked to him and held his hand. She said, "Don't worry too much." I cannot worry. Chun Pippi's 2 most respected senior brothers, Jun Mo and Yi Su, were both doing the most difficult things. He felt anxious every time he thought of this. Tang Xiaodang said, "Fourth uncle sent a letter saying that the academy is trying to open the chessboard, but has not been able to do so. Why don't you worry about it?" Chun Pippi said, "Buddha's chessboard cannot trap Ning Quebec." Tang Xiaodang was confused and asked, "Why?" Chun Pippi said, "Because he's with Hao Yan." Tang Xiaodang said, "But doesn't Buddha want to destroy Hao Yan?" Chun Pippi said, "Even if Buddha can really predict what will happen to Hao Yan after his death, he can't predict Ning Quebec. He is a variable." Tang Xiaodang trusted him very much. Since he said she didn't need to worry, she really didn't. Her expression became bright and cheerful as she said, "To celebrate, let's eat an extra bowl of rice tonight." Chun Pippi sighed and said, "No, I still have no appetite." "What are you still worried about?" Tang Xiaodang was a little perplexed. Since this matter is related to Haotian Taoism, it must be arranged by my father. No matter whether the Buddhist chessboard can trap Hao Yan and Ning Ke, I'm afraid Hao Yan will eventually return to the divine kingdom. Chun Pippi said, "At that time, the war in the human world will start again. Can the academy still hold on? Every time I think about this, I feel like I'm chewing wax. How can I have any appetite? I can only eat 5 bowls tonight." In a city in the kingdom of Song, Yi Su was standing in the old yard of a shabby Taoist temple. He was explaining some chapters of the West Hill scriptures to a dozen new followers. After leaving Lincoln, he traveled around the world, hoping to spread the doctrine of the new stream more widely and awaken more poor believers. In the end, he came to the kingdom of Song, the most powerful Taoism force and the most devout belief in Haotian, to preach. His light-colored robe fluttered in the damp breeze from the sea. The stains on it were obvious and gave off a faint stench. It must have been smashed by rotten eggs. Preaching in the kingdom of Song was much more difficult than in Lincoln. He had been mentally prepared when he chose this place, but he didn't expect the hostility of the people to be so direct. Several broken bricks flew over from the other side of the wall and fell to the ground, making a muffled sound and then breaking into pieces. The dozen followers were frightened and panicked. Then, the wooden door of the small Taoist temple was savagely smashed open, and dozens of people rushed in with sticks in their hands, cursing and swearing. 2 children were mixed in with the adults, watching this scene with excitement. They held bricks in their hands, eager to try. It seemed that they were the ones who threw the broken bricks earlier. Rotten eggs and chopsticks flew everywhere in the courtyard of the Taoist temple. Not long after, Yi Su's body was in a mess. Vegetable leaves hung on his body, and his hair was full of stinky egg juice. The 10 or so followers were beaten badly. Their heads were bleeding, and they begged bitterly to be let out of the Taoist temple. Yi Su was the only one left in the Taoist temple. He looked at the angry people. There was no resentment or disappointment in his eyes, nor was there any pity common to Buddhism monks. He looked calm and even smiled. His reaction made the people even angrier. Some of the men raised sticks and smashed at him. There were many people outside the small Taoist temple. Hearing the noise inside the wall, those who had nowhere to vent their anger couldn't bear it anymore. They squeezed in through the door. The Taoist temple was really small. It could only accommodate dozens of people at most. But in a moment, hundreds of people squeezed in. The scene became very chaotic. Many people were pushed to the ground, unable to stand up. People were trampled everywhere. Sounds of bones breaking and screams could be heard from time to time. Yisu was beaten to the point that he was covered in blood. But he still stood where he was without dodging. Finally, he bent down and squatted on the ground. The men at the front didn't care about the crowd or the screams. They separated the crowd with brute force and continued to hit Yisu with sticks. Dull sounds and sounds of bones breaking could be heard one after another. After a long time, the crowd finally calmed down. Then they realized the scene was so chaotic. Many people were seriously injured. They hurriedly helped the injured out to seek medical treatment. Suddenly, a miserable voice came from outside the Taoist temple. My child, where are my children? Haven't any of you seen my 2 children? A woman in simple clothes cried as she rushed into the Taoist temple. She searched the injured people on the ground. The people who came to cause trouble today were all neighbors. They all knew each other. They hurriedly went to help. The ground was covered in blood. She couldn't find them. The woman's face was pale. She cried so hard that she couldn't catch her breath. She sat on the ground and couldn't get up again. The people in the Taoist temple looked at each other. They thought that in the chaos earlier, even those strong men were seriously injured. Could it be that the 2 children were trampled to death? That was what they thought, but no one dared to say it in front of the woman. For a moment, the scene became extremely quiet. Some people thought angrily, if it wasn't for that person, why would everyone come to the Taoist temple? It's all your fault. You're the main culprit. An old man walked in front of Yisu. He was so angry that his whole body was trembling. He raised the walking stick in his hand and smashed it at him. There was a muffled sound. Yisu spat out a mouthful of blood on the ground. The old man hadn't vented his anger. He was ready to hit him again. Some young men also picked up sticks and followed. They thought that they must beat this blasphemous Taoist to death today. However, the next moment, everyone stopped what they were doing. The walking sticks and sticks in their hands could no longer smash down. They saw a scene. Yisu let go of his hands and sat on the ground weakly. There were 2 children in his arms. The 2 children's faces were pale. They didn't know what had happened. They looked at the neighbors and uncles surrounding them with sticks. When they looked again, they realized that they were so close to Yisu. They couldn't help but scream in fear. They subconsciously picked up the brick in their hands and smashed it at him. Yisu's face was bleeding profusely. Even though he had been hit by the brick, it was only one more wound. He looked at the 2 children and asked with a smile, "Are you okay?" The children didn't know how to answer. No one in the Taoist temple knew how to answer. It was quiet. The old man looked a little confused. The walking stick in his hand slowly fell. Who was this person? After a moment, he came to his senses. He reached out and patted the 2 children's heads. He scolded silly things. "You can hit anyone?" The woman rushed over and held the 2 children in her arms. She thanked Yisu repeatedly. The old man looked at the young men behind him and scolded, "What are you waiting for? Hurry up and call the doctor." The men were a little flustered. They asked, "Sir, the doctor is outside." The old man shouted, "Please come in. Let this gentleman have a look." This was Yisu's current life. What he was doing was actually very similar to what Junimo had done in the underground field. They both wanted the people to know more things. For example, what was in the field above the cliff? For example, what wasn't in the West Hill Divine Palace? For example, what they could do and what they didn't need to do. Faith was the last hope of the unfortunate. But faith couldn't be the root of misfortune or the reason to explain misfortune. True faith should let people have the courage to change their misfortune. So first of all, people should learn to believe in themselves. Yisu and Junimo used to be both proud and brilliant. They went their separate ways in front of the Verdant Canyon, but they finally walked the same path. This path was worth applauding, but it was certainly not a good thing for the Buddhism sect and Haotian Taoism. If human beings all chose to believe in themselves, then the power of Buddha and Haotian would naturally become weak. There was a wheelchair in front of the stone house on the cliff plateau of the West Hill Divine Palace. The Abbey Dean sat in the wheelchair. He seemed to be afraid of the cold wind on the cliff. He wrapped the blanket around himself with difficulty and said, "When Hao Ian returns to the divine kingdom, I will go and kill them. I need to eat something. The next chapter will be later." To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian.com to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 968. The wheelchair was not big, but it was spacious for the Abbey Dean to sit in. He was so thin that he did not take up much space, even if he was wrapped in a blanket. It was just like how even the greatest person could be kept in a small box after his death. Of course, we could not deny the greatness of the person when he was alive. He looked at the gray sky quietly. The sky was dim in his eyes. He was no longer as high-spirited as he was when he entered Chang'an. He was now a candle in the wind, spending his last years. The Abbey Dean was a great man if he did not think about good and evil, morality, or the future of mankind. Even though he had become a disabled man, he still did great things in his last years. Who dared to say that it was not great to put Hao Ian in his plan? Long Qing answered in a low voice. After a long silence, he could not help but ask, "What if?" The Abbey Dean said, "There is no what if." He was the greatest figure in Hao Ian Taoism in the past 1,000 years. He was the most devout believer of Hao Ian, even though he was plotting against Hao Ian. He would never doubt Hao Ian's omnipotence. No one can kill Hao Ian, not the headmaster, not even the Buddha. Long Qing looked at the gray sky and said, "But the Buddha put Hao Ian in that chessboard." The Abbey Dean said, "That chessboard is the nirvana of the Buddha. Even though I saw the Buddha's nirvana, I know what it is. I know what he wants to do, but it's in vain." Long Qing said, "I don't understand." The Abbey Dean said, "Hao Ian knows everything and is omnipotent. Even if she thinks she doesn't know, she still knows. Even if the heaven's plan cannot predict, there is still the heaven's heart. Her heaven's heart is in that chessboard. She wants to go there. Otherwise, why would she look for the Buddha in the human world?" Long Qing asked, "Why does Hao Ian want to find that chessboard?" The Abbey Dean said, "Because that chessboard can bring her back to the divine kingdom." Long Qing said, "I still don't understand." The Abbey Dean said, "Even she doesn't understand, not to mention you." Long Qing frowned slightly and said, "But teacher, you understand, because Hao Ian told me." The Abbey Dean pointed to the gloomy sky and said, "It's not Hao Ian Taoism who wants to plot against Hao Ian, and it's not me who wants to kill Hao Ian through the Buddha's plot. It's Hao Ian who wants to go back." Long Qing was silent for a long time. He understood what the Abbey Dean meant. Even if Buddha killed Hao Ian in the chessboard, it only meant that he helped Hao Ian return to the purest rules. But were these really her own thoughts? Or was it the thoughts of Hao Ian in the divine kingdom? What was her relationship with Hao Ian in the divine kingdom? Who was the real Hao Ian? "It's all because of Hao Ian," the Abbey Dean said. "If the Buddha is really in the chessboard, suppressing or even occupying Hao Ian forever, and neither killing her nor letting her out, how can she return to the holy kingdom?" Long Qing said, "The chief monk of scripture said a year ago that there is only the fate of Buddha, not the will of heaven." Hearing what he said, the Abbey Dean could not help but laugh. He laughed happily and innocently, like a child who was secretly opening presents in the treehouse. He even shed tears. Apart from Hao Ian himself, how could there be such a thing as eternity? She either dies in the chessboard and returns to the divine kingdom, or she comes out alive and returns to the divine kingdom. The Abbey Dean took the handkerchief from Long Qing and wiped the tears off his face. He said with a smile, "Who can trap heaven? How can heaven be trapped? Even if it can escape from heaven's plan, how can it escape from heaven's heart? Even if you can escape from this side of heaven, how can you escape from that side of heaven? Even Hao Ian can't escape from her own heart, not to mention the headmaster of academy or the Bulsh *T Buddha. How ridiculous!" Long Qing still did not understand. If Hao Ian died in the chessboard, or she could turn into rules and return to the divine kingdom, why was the Abbey Dean so sure that she would return to the divine kingdom even if she came out alive? The Abbey Dean felt a bit cold. He raised his skinny right hand. The middle-aged priest stood behind the wheelchair and did not say a word. He pushed the wheelchair into the stone house. The Abbey Dean left some words for Long Qing, and then closed his eyes tiredly to rest his mind. Tell Xiong Chumo to get ready. The morning bell and the evening drum, the spring flowers and the autumn fruits, the pickles and rice, the black crows and the brook, the Buddhist scriptures in the sky, the lake and the white tower, time and space all seemed to be flowing and yet still. Ning Ke finished reading hundreds of volumes of Buddhist scriptures and began to read the notes left by the former eminent monks. He cultivated in silence with the bell ringing. His dharma gradually deepened, and his mind was as tranquil as a well. Sang Sang was still watching the sky, sometimes in the courtyard, sometimes by the lake, sometimes in the stream, and sometimes in the tranquil lake. She could never get tired of watching it. One morning, Ning Ke came to the White Tower Temple after making breakfast. As usual, he chatted with the demented monk called Monk Qingban and then went to the meditation room to read scriptures. While reading the Buddhist scriptures, he felt happy and peaceful. He felt that his Zen heart was clear. Listening to the bell ringing from the distant hall, he seemed to forget all his troubles and worries. All of a sudden, he saw a shadow on the wall. It was a shadow left on the wall by the candlelight. The shadow was sitting cross-legged and seemed to be cultivating. Only then did he realize that it was already late at night outside the window. He could not help but sigh that the Dharma was indeed marvelous. Reading Buddhist scriptures could make one forget the passage of time and the suffering. Sang Sang did not follow him to the White Tower Temple today. Thinking that she was still waiting for him at home to make dinner, Ning Ke put away the Buddhist scriptures on the table, blew out the candles, and was ready to leave. But when he crossed the threshold, he suddenly stopped. He stood in the threshold and kept silent for a long time. Beads of sweat oozed from his forehead. He wanted to turn back, but he did not dare to. He had a strong feeling that something terrible would happen if he turned back, and his beautiful life would be gone forever. He struggled for a long time and finally turned back, because he was curious. For human beings, curiosity was the best emotion to overcome fear. Ning Ke saw the shadow on the wall again. He was not reading Buddhist scriptures at the table. The candles on the table had been extinguished, and the stars above the temple were covered by clouds. It was dark, but the shadow was still there. It was not his shadow. Then whose shadow was it? Ning Ke looked at the shadow and kept silent for a long time again. Then he walked to the wall. His footsteps were heavy, and so was his expression. He walked to the wall and observed it for a long time. He even reached out to touch it and found nothing strange about it. It was just a pure shadow that could only be seen but not touched. The shade was the shadow of the tree. The sun was the shadow, and the mountain was the shadow. Whose shadow was it? How could there be a shadow that existed alone in the world? Ning Ke thought for a while and sat cross-legged in front of the shadow. It was not until he sat cross-legged that he realized that it was his own shadow, because it was exactly the same. When he was sitting at the desk, he saw the shadow sitting cross-legged and seemed to be cultivating Buddha, but he did not notice it. He suddenly remembered that he had seen a shadow on the stone wall deep in the cliff cave of Xiankong Temple. It was the shadow of Master Lotus. Could it be that his cultivation of Buddha had reached the state of lotus? Ning Ke was a little surprised. He sat on the lotus in his sense of perception and began to cultivate Buddha. He was a little worried that the shadow would gradually fade, so he wanted to strengthen it. In just a moment, he entered the state of dhyana samadhi. However, what shocked him was that the shadow on the wall suddenly struggled. The shadow was no longer sitting cross-legged. It stood up on the wall and raised its arms to support its head, as if it was trying to support something extremely heavy. No, the shadow seemed to be trying to break the sky. The sky was too heavy for the shadow to succeed. It began to hold its head and twist its body into all kinds of strange shapes, seeming to be in extreme pain. The shadow continued to struggle like a black flame, burning on the white wall and spitting out flames. It was as if it was dancing a weird dance that made the heaven and earth dance with it. Ning Ke stared at the shadow, struggling in pain. He did not know why he could feel its pain. What made him feel even colder was that he could feel a deep unwillingness and anger from the shadow's struggle. The unwillingness and anger were so desperate that the whole world was about to cry. A strong sense of bitterness rushed to his eyebrows, and Ning Ke began to cry. At this moment, a bell rang in the White Tower Temple. The evening class should have ended long ago. Why was there a bell ringing in the temple? The bell was so melodious that it could clear one's heart and calm one's mind. Ning Ke gradually calmed down as he listened to the bell. The shadow on the wall also calmed down. However, it was only for a moment before the shadow struggled again. And because of the bell, it became even more crazy and violent. There was a loud buzzing sound. It was not the bell in the temple, but the sound in Ning Ke's head. He felt as if someone was holding a sharp, giant axe in his head and chopping at his skull. An indescribable pain spread from his head to his body. His face was pale and his lips were trembling. He was in so much pain that he could not even make a sound. The bell in the temple stopped ringing and there was silence. The bell in Ning Ke's head continued. The giant axe was still chopping at his skull, as if it was going to split his head open. He held his head and rolled on the ground in pain. What was going on? Because of the severe pain, his clothes were soaked in sweat, and he was in a trance. He did not notice that in the deepest part of his sense of perception, several pieces of consciousness became unusually bright, as if they were about to explode. His only remaining consciousness was to find the person who was waving the axe in his head. He wanted to kill that person. He wanted to get rid of this terrible pain. He climbed to the wall with difficulty and looked at the frantically struggling shadow. He pulled out the iron cutlass and chopped at it with all his strength. He knew that all this must have something to do with the shadow. He wanted to chop it to death. The iron cutlass fell on the wall. Smoke and dust rose and bricks flew everywhere. However, the shadow was still there, still in front of him. At this moment, a bell suddenly rang high up in the sky above the night temple. The bell fell into the meditation room, fell on him, and also fell on his heart. The sound of the bell was another giant axe. Someone was chopping at his head with an axe. Someone was chopping at him with an axe in the sky. He huddled in the corner, his face pale and his eyes scattered and painful, as if he would die at any moment. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. Chapter 969. If there was a hole in the corner of the wall, Ning Ke would definitely crawl into it, regardless of whether it was the endless abyss or the legendary netherworld. But there wasn't, so he could only hold his head and tremble in pain. He sweated profusely and blood kept flowing from the corner of his mouth. Tears and snot flowed down his face, and his clothes were already wet. He had never experienced such terrible pain. He even felt that it was countless times more difficult to endure than when he was captured by the horse gang in the wilderness and interrogated. The axe in his head and the invisible giant axe in the sky kept falling, as if it would never stop, making him feel incomparable despair. Later, his body even began to twitch, and his eyes began to lose focus. Even the color of his lips had turned into an ominous gray. He was really no different from a dead person. After a long time, the giant axe from the sky finally stopped. Although the axe in his head was still chopping, it was slightly better. He stood up with unimaginable willpower and rushed out of the meditation room, not daring to look back at the shadow. After escaping from the White Tower Temple, he staggered forward while coughing blood all the way to the astonished eyes of the people of Chaoyang City. Finally, he walked back to the small courtyard. When he saw Sang Sang under the tree, he suddenly relaxed and could no longer resist the weakness brought by the pain. He blacked out and fainted. When he woke up, it was already dawn. Sang Sang was sitting by the bed and had fallen asleep. There was a bowl of grass ginseng porridge on the table. The porridge was still faintly steaming. It seemed that she had heated it many times last night. Ning Ke thought of those nights in the city of Wei and Chong and many years ago. He felt a little warm. He got up and helped her to the bed and covered her with a quilt. His stomach growled, and he found that his stomach was wet. He picked up the bowl of porridge and wiped his mouth. When he was about to go to the White Tower Temple, as usual, his face suddenly turned pale. He remembered what happened in the meditation room last night. As soon as he thought about it, he felt a sharp pain in his head. Although no one was chopping him with an axe, the pain was still there. Sang Sang opened her eyes and quietly looked at him for a long time. Suddenly, She pointed at his head and said, "There is someone in your head. He wants to come out." Nothing could be hidden from Hao Yan's eyes, but she did not know what had happened to Ning Quebec. Why was there someone chopping in his head with an axe? Even if she could explain this, how could she explain the invisible giant axe falling from the sky? Ning Ke walked to the window and looked at the gray sky. He asked in a trembling voice, "Why did you strike me that day?" Sang Sang thought for a moment and said, "Maybe it's because you haven't been with me these days and often forget to cook for me. So you were struck by lightning? There is no thunder, only the sky." Ning Ke said. Sang Sang asked, "What's the difference?" Ning Ke's face was slightly pale. He turned to look at her and said, "Why did heaven strike me?" Sang Sang pointed to herself and said, "I am the sky, or I want to chop you." Ning Ke asked, "Are you hacking me?" Sang Sang looked at the sky outside the window and said, "Maybe it's because I can't stand you treating me like this." Thinking of the pain last night, Ning Ke shouted angrily, "I married you, but I have to be controlled by your twin brothers and sisters? Is there any justice?" Sang Sang's expression did not change, and she said, "Our reason is the justice." Ning Ke felt that this statement was somewhat unreasonable, and he did not know whether her reason made sense or not. Anyway, he decided not to go to the White Tower Temple today. Although he wanted to know what was going on with the shadow on the wall, and why there was an axe in his head and the sky that wanted to chop him, he did not want to repeat the painful process last night. Human curiosity could indeed overcome the fear of the unknown, but it did not necessarily overcome the pain. That day, he stayed in the small courtyard and accompanied Sang Sang to look at the sky in a daze. Every time a temple bell rang in the distance, his face would turn a little pale because he was afraid. Sang Sang looked at his expression and said in confusion, "You were not so afraid of pain before." Ning Ke said, "I was afraid of pain before, but I had to take care of you, so I could only pretend not to be afraid." Sang Sang said, "You have to take care of me now." Ning Ke thought for a moment and said, "It makes sense. I have to figure out what is going on, or there will be problems. But let's talk about it in a few days. I am really a little scared." After all, he still underestimated human curiosity, or because he had to take care of Sang Sang, he overcame his fear. He did not wait for a long time and returned to the White Tower Temple the next day. Monk Ching Ban was chatting with him as usual, but he did not have the energy to pay attention to him. He went directly to the meditation room, where the wall he smashed last night had been repaired. He faced the wall and remained silent for a long time. There was no shadow on the wall. He sat back at the table and began to read the Buddhist scriptures. When dusk came, he lit the candle on the table. When he lit the candle, his hands trembled, so the flame was also a little shaky. The shadow reappeared on the wall. At first, it was a little weak because of the shaky candlelight, but it only took a very short time for it to become clear. Ning Ke stood up. It was just a simple movement, but it seemed to consume all his strength. When he walked to the wall, his steps seemed a little weak. The shadow sat cross-legged, as if it was cultivating the Buddha. Ning Ke took several deep breaths and sat cross-legged facing the wall. "Who are you?" He looked at the shadow and asked. Of course, the shadow would not answer him. It was silent like a dead monk. Ning Ke stared at the shadow as if he wanted to see through it. The shadow had no eyes, so would not look at him. Just when Ning Ke thought that the night would pass peacefully, the bell suddenly rang in the White Tower Temple. Just like the night before, the evening class had already ended, but the bell began to echo. He could not even tell whether the bell came from the hall or from his heart. Ning Ke was very nervous. He remembered that something strange happened when the bell rang last night. It was the same tonight. The bell seemed to be the signal of the beginning of a catastrophe. The bell, which had a strong effect of calming the mind, made the shadow on the wall crazy. The shadow no longer sat cross-legged. It stood up and began to wave its arms to the sky. It was not calling someone, but seemed to be cursing somewhere in the sky. The shadow turned into a black flame and kept dancing, as if it was going to burn everything. It was like a prisoner on the stake in pain. Its body was burned and scorched by the flame, which looked extremely horrible. Ning Ke felt a little sad and began to cry. He felt the shadow's unwillingness, despair, and anger, and the seemingly endless desolation and sadness. He seemed to see an old monk standing in front of a tomb, cursing the heaven and the earth, slandering Taoism and Buddha, and wanting to tear the world apart. Ning-Ke cried, not only because he felt these emotions, but also because he knew that he would soon start to suffer the same pain as the night before. There was a loud, buzzing sound. Ning-Ke felt that someone was standing in his sense of perception, holding a sharp giant axe and chopping at his skull. It seemed that the person was going to break his head and jump out. The severe pain spread from the top of his head to his limbs. He even felt that his skin was being pricked by countless fine needles. It was like being peeled and then sprinkled with countless handfuls of sea salt. Ning-Ke's face suddenly turned pale, and his body kept trembling like a mountain that could collapse at any time. But he was prepared for tonight, so he forcibly maintained the posture of sitting cross-legged. "Lotus, what the hell are you doing?" He looked at the shadow on the wall and shouted angrily. The shadow on the wall did not answer him. It was still struggling desperately, cursing and hitting at the sky. So the axe was still chopping at his head. Ning-Ke endured the pain and bit his lips tightly. His trembling and hoarse voice came out from his teeth. He looked extremely miserable. He shouted, "If you don't stop, I will kill you." The fragments of Lotus's consciousness had been lying quietly in the depths of his sense of perception for many years. When Ning-Ke was in danger, it would occasionally light up and give him instructions. Although Lotus's consciousness was very strong, it was after all a remnant left after death. Ning-Ke believed that with the strength of his psyche power, he could definitely suppress it. The shadow still did not pay attention to him and seemed very contemptuous. Because of the pain, Ning-Ke's eyebrows kept twitching, and his clothes had long been soaked with sweat. He knew that he could no longer bear it, so he decisively mobilized his psyche power and dived into the depths of his sense of perception. Although it was a pity and he was unwilling, he still had to crush the fragments of consciousness left by Lotus. Otherwise, he might really go crazy in this kind of pain, or even directly die. But he forgot that he had two axes. As soon as he mobilized his psyche power, a thunderous bell rang in the sky above the White Tower Temple. The invisible giant axe fell from the high sky and directly chopped at his body. At this moment, he felt as if his body was split in half, and his heart was also split in half. Although he bit his lips, he could not stop an extremely miserable howl from bursting out from his lips. He fell to the ground in pain and kept vomiting blood. His body kept twisting, like a mudfish stuffed into a hot pot. Soon the ground became stained with blood. The axe from the sky and the axe from the sense of perception continued to chop at him. His eyes were glazed, and he could no longer bear it, so he passed out. But even in a coma, his body still twitched from time to time. Obviously, the two axes from the sky and the head were still chopping at him. After a long time, he woke up in the meditation room. The sky outside the window was bright, and he had been in a coma for a whole night. Fortunately, the bell and the axe stopped. He wiped the blood from the corner of his mouth, struggled out of the meditation room, and came to the lake. Monk Qingban was by the lake. Seeing his pale face and the blood on his body, he was a little surprised and said blankly, "Senior brother, are you chanting or killing in the meditation room?" Ning-Ke looked at the blue sky and asked, "Did you hear the bell?" Monk Qingban looked confused and said, "What bell?" Ning-Ke also looked confused and said, "Why can only I hear it?" Chapter 1. To be continued. If you like this work, please come come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 970. After returning to the small courtyard, Ning-Ke sat under the tree and meditated for 3 days and 3 nights. He felt that he had completely recovered. He got up and walked out. Sang said, "If you can't figure it out, why suffer?" Ning-Ke did not look back and said, "I have suffered so much. Of course, I have to figure it out." He came to the White Tower Temple and quietly read the Buddhist scriptures and the notes of the previous eminent monks. When dusk came, he lit the candle on the table. He was very familiar with this and did it naturally. The candle was slightly lit and the shadow reappeared on the wall. He walked to the wall and sat down cross-legged. After thinking for a while, he took out the iron cutlass and put it on the ground beside him. At the same time, he took out a few pieces of food paper from his sleeves and prepared to use them later. In fact, he was very clear that neither the iron cutlass nor the divine talisman would have any effect on the shadow on the wall and the two giant axes, because this was not an ordinary disaster. But doing so could make him feel a little relieved. It did not take long before the bell in the White Tower Temple rang again. The monks in the temple still did not hear it. Only Ning Kai could hear it. He looked at the shadow on the wall and said, "Come on." The shadow stood up and began to roar and struggle violently. The giant axe was waved crazily in Ning Kai's mind again. Ning Kai's face suddenly turned pale, and the blue veins on his forehead appeared with the rhythm of the axe falling. He gritted his teeth and began to bleed, but he still maintained the posture of sitting cross-legged and refused to surrender. Now he was very clear that the shadow on the wall was his and Lien Sheng's. The giant axe in his head was actually a fragment of Lien Sheng's consciousness. 3 days ago, when he could not bear the pain, he wanted to use his psyche power to suppress the fragment of Lien Sheng's consciousness. But at that time, the axe fell from the sky. On the first night, although he did not understand the truth of the matter, he instinctively wanted to destroy the fragment of Lien Sheng's consciousness. It was also at that time that the bell rang in the sky. He did not have the ability to resist the two giant axes at the same time. He wanted to try whether he could resist the axe in his head. You keep struggling and twisting. Those who know you will know that you are suffering, but those who don't will think that you are really crazy. What do you want to do? Ning Kai looked at the shadow struggling in pain on the wall and asked with a pale face, "What do you want? Just tell me. How can I know what you want if you don't tell me?" The shadow still did not answer him. The axe was still chopping away at his head. Bean-sized beads of sweat flowed down his nose and into his mouth. It was slightly salty, but it was unknown whether it was sweat or blood. He stared at the shadow on the wall, his body trembling as he endured the increasingly terrifying pain. He clenched his fists so tightly that his nails dug deep into his palms. "What the devil do you want?" He cried in pain and anger. The shadow suddenly stopped and turned into a dark shadow. It spread out in all directions and eventually occupied the entire meditation room. Whether it was the candlelight or the starlight outside the window, they all fell on the walls and the floor in darkness. In this dark world, Ning Kai saw the stone beams suspended in the air in the belly of the devil's doctrine. He saw the wordless tablet, the mountain of white bones, and the skinny old monk in the mountain. The old monk was a Buddha, but he was also a demon. The old monk said, "If you want to cultivate the devil, you must first cultivate Buddhism." Ning Kai said, "I've been practicing Buddhism." The old monk said, "If you don't go crazy, you won't become a Buddha." Ning Kai came to his senses and remembered that he had heard these words before. Then he realized that Lotus was not answering his question, but just a wisp of thought after his death, repeating the past. The old monk's eye sockets were deep, as if there were ghost fires shining in them. His face was twisted and he seemed to be in extreme pain. He screamed, "But these are all fake. Buddha is fake. Even the devil is fake." Ning Kai woke up in a cold sweat. With a squeak, the door of the meditation room was pushed open. The shadows in the room suddenly converged and turned into a shadow sitting cross-legged on the wall. Sang Sang walked behind him and looked at the shadow quietly. She said, "He's not Lotus." Ning Kai's head was still aching. He asked absent-mindedly, "Then who is it?" Sang Sang looked at him and said, "It's you." Ning Kai asked, "Why me? What about the bell from the sky?" Sang Sang said, I don't know. She was the omniscient Hao Yin, but she did not know the answer to these two questions. In the following days, Ning Kai still went to the White Tower Temple occasionally. He asked the shadow on the wall in pain and cursed angrily, but he still did not find the answer. The most painful thing for him was that if he did not go to the White Tower Temple, the axe in his head would not hit him. But no matter where he was, the bell in the sky was still ringing. The invisible giant axe kept hitting his body and mind, as if it would not stop until it cut him into two pieces. No one could hear the bell falling from the sky, just like no one could hear the bell in the White Tower Temple at night. No one could see the giant axe falling from the sky, not even Sang Sang. Sometimes Ning Ke even thought that these were all illusions. But the incomparably clear pain kept reminding him that the axe really existed and that someone was really hitting him. What kind of pain was it to have the giant axe slashing at his body all the time? He couldn't bear it all. His body became weaker and weaker, and his spirit became more and more scattered. Sometimes he really couldn't bear it and rushed into the courtyard to curse at the sky, but he found that it was meaningless. Sang Sang spent all her time taking care of him. She wiped the sweat from his forehead, drove away the shadows of nightmares and summer flies, held his hand, and occasionally looked at the sky. 3 years passed. Ning Ke had been hit by the axe for 3 whole years. Time seemed so long and unbearable in the pain. He even thought of killing himself, but he could not bear to leave Sang Sang. One day, in late autumn, Ning Ke got up from his bed and walked to the table. He reached out his trembling fingers and picked up the teacup to take a sip of tea. He used a lot of strength to keep the teacup from falling. Genuine pain would cause one's body to react instinctively. Endless pain was a great torment to one's spirit, and it was also a great harm to one's body. He pushed the door and walked out of the room. Looking at Sang Sang, who was preparing lunch in the kitchen, he said, "I have no appetite. Just eat something." Sang Sang stood up and looked at him quietly. Suddenly, she smiled. Ning Ke thought that there was something on his face. He reached out and touched it, only to find that he had lost a lot of weight. Suddenly, his expression changed slightly. He remembered that he had not felt pain for a long time. He looked up at the clear autumn sky and murmured, "Don't you want to chop any more?" Sang Sang said, "Do you want to go out for a walk?" In the past 3 years, Ning Ke rarely left the hospital for a walk. He did not want to hold Sang Sang's hand and suddenly fall to the ground with a pale face when they walked to the weeping willow by the river. That would be very embarrassing. But since the axe in the sky was not chopping anymore, maybe they could go out for a walk. But why did he feel a little disappointed that the axe was not chopping anymore? "Okay," he said with a smile. But because of the constant pain, he had not smiled for a long time, so his smile seemed a little stiff. Sang Sang dried her hands on the apron and asked, "Where to?" Ning Ke thought for a while and said, "Let's go to the White Tower Temple." Walking into the meditation room, Ning Ke closed the door and sat in front of the wall. Sang Sang was outside the meditation room, quietly looking at the sky. The candle had been lit, and a shadow on the wall gradually appeared. "Long time no see." Ning Ke looked at the shadow and said, "I don't know whether you are Lotus or me, but I think you won't hurt me. So what do you want to tell me?" Just like in the past 3 years, the shadow still did not speak. Ning Ke said, "No matter what is going on, I don't want to endure it anymore. While the axe in the sky has not fallen and I am still sober, I want to ask you for the last time." The shadow slowly stood up and looked up. "If you still refuse to give me an answer, then maybe I have to die." Ning Ke smiled bitterly and said, "I really can't stand it anymore." The shadow suddenly looked at him. The shadow had no eyes, but Ning Ke knew that he was looking at him. Ning Ke stared at him and said, "If I die, you will die too." The shadow suddenly bent down and kept trembling. It seemed that he was laughing so hard that he could not stop his tears. Ning Ke was about to say something when the shadow suddenly straightened up and hit his head with his palm. The bell of the White Tower Temple rang again. The giant axe in Ning Ke's head fiercely chopped at his head. This was the heaviest blow in the past 3 years. Almost at the same time, an extremely violent sound rang in the sky. An invisible and extremely sharp giant blade came from the sky and fell on Ning Ke's body in the blink of an eye. The 2 axes met on Ning Ke's head, separated only by the top of his skull. There was a loud buzzing sound. Ning Ke felt that his body and heart were really split into 2 halves. The severe pain made his pupils shrink and the root of his tongue numb. He could not even bite his tongue to commit suicide. The next moment, the pain slowly disappeared like the ebbing tide. He felt as if his head had been split open. His eyes were in the gap, and he could see things. He looked at the wall and the sky at the same time. He felt that his body was completely transparent. He could see the scenes that he could not see before. He could see clearly the things that he could not see before. Was this the divine sight? Earlier, people gathered under the pear tree at the back of the mountain of the academy. Sixth brother held an iron hammer and kept hitting the chessboard. The others kept cheering for him. They kept hitting the chessboard. As long as Ning Ke did not come out, they would keep hitting it. They believed that one day the chessboard would be broken. The autumn wind blew slightly. Eldest brother came under the pear tree, and everyone came forward to bow. Eldest brother took the iron hammer and said, "You take a break. Let me try it." The iron hammer fell, and smoke and dust rose. The sound was like thunder. Shimin Buhua praised. Senior brother is indeed senior brother. The sound is so loud. Beigong Weiyong looked at the chessboard and said disappointedly, "Isn't it still not broken?" Eldest brother smiled embarrassedly and handed over the iron hammer. Chapter 2. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 971. Ning Ke stood up and looked a little confused. Then he spat out a mouthful of blood. With a puff, the wall was suddenly covered with blood. The gray wall of the meditation room was stained with blood. The shadow was on the wall, so was the blood. The shadow put his palms together as if he was very happy. Then he turned around and walked into the depths of the blood sea and gradually disappeared. Ning Ke looked at this scene and suddenly felt very sad. It seemed that he would never see the shadow again. The shadow disappeared, and the gray wall gradually disappeared. It turned out that the wall was fake. He looked back at the candle on the table and found that the candle was also fake. He looked at the wooden door of the meditation room and found that the door was fake, and the threshold was also fake. He looked at the roof of the meditation room and looked through the beams at the gray sky. The meditation room was fake, and so was the temple. Then what about Chao-Ching and Yang? What about the sky? Ning Ke pushed open the wooden door of the meditation room and walked out. At this moment, the clouds in the sky suddenly disappeared and the sun appeared. The world suddenly became extremely clear. The white tower and the clear lake were as beautiful as a painting. The sun shone on his face, and he slightly squinted his eyes. The clouds in the sky floated over again and blocked the sun. Then a cold autumn rain fell and wet the picture of the white tower and the lake. Sang Sang was not outside the meditation room. She should be looking at the sky by the lake as she had done these years. Ning Ke walked to the lake calmly, as if he had already been relieved. Monk Qingban was standing under the willow by the lake to avoid the rain. Looking at Ning Ke's expression, he was slightly stunned and then showed a sincere emotion on his face. He asked happily, "Senior brother, did you get it?" Ning Ke looked at the crazy monk and said, "Yes, I got it all." Monk Qingban opened his eyes wide and asked eagerly, "What did you get?" Ning Ke said, "Everything is fake." Monk Qingban was confused and repeated it subconsciously, "What is fake?" "Yes." Ning Ke stood by the lake and looked at the white tower that was constantly being washed by the autumn rain. He said, "This tower is fake, and the rain falling on it is also fake. This lake is also fake." He pointed at the lake in front of him and then continued, "The temple is fake, the city is fake, the country is fake, and the people are also fake. The blue pass in the snow is fake, and the 72 temples in the misty rain are also fake." Monk Qingban scratched his ears and cheeks anxiously. He didn't understand what Ning Ke was talking about. He suddenly thought of something and took out a steamed bun from his robe. "I am real," Monk Qingban said innocently. He took a bite of the steamed bun and chewed hard. Then he said vaguely, "I'm eating the steamed bun, so the steamed bun must be real." Ning Ke looked at him with pity in his eyes, but he did not say anything. Monk Qingban pointed at the lake in front of him and the white tower on the other side of the lake with the steamed bun in his hand. He cried aggrievedly, "These are all here, and I can see them all. You are so unreasonable." Ning Ke looked at him in silence for a long and said, "Monk of monk." Monk Qingban looked at him blankly, not understanding what he was talking about. Ning Ke said, "In fact, you died many years ago. You are only left with a wisp of Buddha's nature. The monks in the temple said that you have innate wisdom. Of course, they are right. You were an eminent monk of the Buddhism sect in your previous life. It is a pity that you were killed as soon as you entered the human realm. Otherwise, you might have become the Vedanta of Xiankong Temple. Monk Qingban was confused and asked, I was killed? Who would kill me? Who killed me? Ning Ke looked at him quietly and said, I'm the one who killed you. Your name is Daoshi. Your mother is the elder sister of the Yueluan Kingdom, Kunimati. Your father is the president of the commandment yard of the Xiankong Temple, Master Bushu. Because I once humiliated your mother, after you left the Xiankong Temple, you first became a Dharma name in the 72 temples of the Yueluan Kingdom, and then went to Chang and to find me. Then I killed you. Later, in order to avenge you, your father, Master Bushu, wanted to suppress the daughter of Yama and kill me at the same time. He left the Xiankong Temple with the Yulan bell and set up a trap with Qin Yin, the world wayfarer of the Buddhism sect. In the end, the trap was broken by the Academy. Your father died in the hands of the Academy, which means he died in my hands. Later, she and I fled to Chuyang City and were besieged in this White Tower Temple by countless believers and powerhouses of Buddhism and Taoism. Your mother, Kunimati, was cultivating here and was taken hostage by me. I was going to let her go later, but for some reason, I killed her in the end. Ning Ke looked at Monk Qingban and said calmly, I killed you and your family. But, why did you kill me? Why did you kill my family? Monk Qingban didn't listen to Ning Ke's words at all. He only felt confused and scratched his head, and my name is Qingban, not Daoshi. Are you mistaken? Ning Ke said, Qingban is the stone used to pave the road. Senior brother, you must be joking. Monk Qingban said with a silly smile, I'm called Qingban because when the abbot and the abbot played mahjong all night, they finally heard a clear board. But when they heard me crying on the stone steps, their hands trembled and they threw away the second round of mahjong. That's why I'm called Qingban. Ning Ke didn't say anything more. Since he didn't believe it, why should he believe it? Monk Qingban didn't give up. He followed Ning Ke and kept asking, how can you prove it? Sang Sang had been sitting by the lake and looking at the sky, so she heard their conversation clearly. She looked back at Ning Ke with a slightly confused expression. Ning Ke didn't need to prove anything to Monk Qingban, but he had to prove it to her. Only by making her believe it could she really wake up and they could leave here. Which direction is Chang in? He asked. Sang Sang sat by the lake and pointed to somewhere in the east. He untied the arrow box and assembled the iron bow in a very short time. Then he drew the bow and put an arrow in the distance. When the bowstring was like a full moon, he suddenly released it. A round white turbulence appeared at the end of the arrow, and the dark iron arrow disappeared on the lake. No one knew where it went. There was no response for a long time. See, I told you it was fake, Ning Ke said. Sang Sang asked why. Ning Ke said, if Chang and is there, the Academy will definitely know it if the iron arrow is shot there. Sang Sang thought for a moment and said, then, Ning Ke said, eldest brother hasn't come after such a long time, which means that there is no eldest brother in this world. So this world is naturally fake. Sang Sang was a little confused and asked, will he man come? Ning Ke said, yes. He came back then, and he will come back now. Sang Sang didn't say anything. Ning Ke pointed to the lake and the white tower in front of her and said, many years ago, before we entered the chessboard, the white tower and the lake were in Xiankong Temple. Why are they here? Sang Sang said, we left Xiankong Temple, so the white tower and the lake can naturally come back. Ning Ke's arrow and words still couldn't convince her. She hadn't woken up yet, or, in other words, she didn't want to wake up. She just quietly looked at the sky reflected by the lake. Actually, I don't want to wake up either. Especially at the moment when I woke up, I was very uneasy and even scared. My body and mind were cold, and my divine sense was agitated. I even vomited a lot of blood. Ning Ke walked to her side and sat down. He gently held her hand and looked at the gray sky. He said, although this world is illusory, these years, especially the first few years, were really happy. Those days were really good. I really don't want to leave and don't want to leave. Sang Sang leaned on his shoulder and looked confused. Ning Ke gently touched the small white flower on her hair and said, You think the sky is beautiful. Sang Sang gently nodded. Ning Ke said, You think the sky is very familiar and intimate, so you want to see it? Sang Sang looked at the gray and high sky. She obviously knew the answer, but she didn't dare to say it. Ning Ke hesitated a little and said, You were born in the sky, and you grew up there. It is your home, so you feel familiar and intimate with it. You always want to go back. After hearing this, the confusion in Sang Sang's eyes gradually faded and became calm. Just like the lake in front of her that was disturbed by the autumn rain, it gradually calmed down, and the reflected sky became clear. She blinked, and the lake waves swayed, just like her eyes. The sky reflected by the lake was cut into countless pieces of light and shadow. The original appearance of the sky could no longer be found. It turned into countless stars, as if they were constantly being born and destroyed. The lake evaporated, and the white tower disappeared. Since it was in Xiankong Temple, it naturally couldn't be in front of her. Sang Sang looked at the sky. The rain clouds suddenly dispersed, revealing the clear blue sky behind. However, it was still not the sky she wanted to see. Several cracks suddenly appeared on the porcelain-like blue sky. It was as if a beautiful piece of porcelain had been thrown to the ground, and the sky had shattered just like that. She had quietly watched the sky in the small courtyard and by the lake for hundreds of years. Today, with the help of Ning Ke, she finally saw through the sky and saw the darkness and nothingness behind it. Yes, this world was fake, or it was real. But in any case, this was not her world. This was the inside of the chessboard, and this was the world of Buddha. She slowly stood up and put her hands behind her back. Monk Qingban looked at the suddenly dark sky and panicked. He grabbed Ning Ke's sleeve and said in a trembling voice, Senior brother, what's wrong? Ning Ke said, We are going to leave here. You go and find a place to hide. Monk Qingban asked, Where are you going? Ning Ke said, We are going outside. Outside? Where's outside? Monk Qingban looked at him in a daze and suddenly said sadly, Am I really dead? Ning Ke didn't say anything. Monk Qingban kept crying. He kept wiping his tears with his sleeve, but he couldn't wipe them clean. Ning Ke's expression suddenly became solemn. Monk Qingban wiped his tears with his sleeve, but his tears couldn't be wiped clean. He wiped his face with his sleeve, and his face was very clean. When he wiped his face with his sleeve, one of his eyebrows was gone. When he wiped again, his nose was gone. When he wiped again, his eyes were gone. He seemed to feel a little embarrassed. He covered his face with his sleeve and said honestly, I don't want you to go. Monk Qingban rubbed himself with his sleeves until he looked like a Buddha covering his face. He said he didn't want Ning Ke and Sang Sang to go. He didn't want them to go. Chapter 3, to be continued. If you like this work, please come to Qidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 972. In the records of Buddhist scriptures, there was a Vedanta with a handsome face, which was very similar to the Buddha. Countless believers mistook him for the Buddha and worshipped him. The Vedanta was ashamed and thought that he had wronged the common people. So he cut his face with a sharp knife and became extremely ugly. Every time he went out, he would cover his face. Every time he met a child, he would be thrown a stone, and every time he met a dog, he would be bitten or barked at. He used to be very popular, but now he was hated by the common people. However, he didn't say any evil words or show any evil face. He allowed people to humiliate and beat him without fighting back. Ning Ke didn't understand why Monk Qingban could become a real Buddha just by wiping his face with his sleeves. After a moment of silence, he said in a low voice, You are dead. Even if you become a Buddha here, you are still dead. Since you are dead, how can you keep us here? Thinking is the will, and the will is the power. I don't want you to go, so you have to stay. Monk Qingban covered his face with his sleeves. His face had no eyes or lips, but he could still speak. His words were full of compassion and solemnity. The light of Buddha shone through his sleeves, which was extremely gorgeous. As soon as he finished speaking, his sleeves fell on Ning Ke's face with endless Buddha's power. Ning Ke had been prepared for this. With a bang, he unsheathed his iron cutlass and cut across the air. The sleeves and the iron cutlass met silently. But the autumn trees by the lake bent down because of the strong wind. With dense cracking sounds, countless trees were broken from the middle, revealing the white stubble. A monk's sleeves fluttered in the wind. The iron cutlass broke out of the sleeves and fell on the neck of Monk Qingban. The black cutlass became red and extremely hot. The vermilion bird kept screaming in the flame. Monk Qingban had no facial features, so it was difficult to show his emotions. But at this time, one could clearly see that he was shocked. He couldn't understand why Ning Kei's iron cutlass could break the Buddha's power so easily. I killed you once in Chang'an. At that time, in the ocean of consciousness, I proved to you that there is no Buddha in my heart. Although I have been cultivating Buddhism for many years, I still can't do it. Ning Kei's cutlass cut across the neck of Monk Qingban and said, "So I can kill you again." He withdrew the cutlass, and the head of Monk Qingban fell from his shoulders like a ripe fruit. It fell on the floor and rolled to the broken tree by the lake. Monk Qingban's body was still standing. Countless golden liquid flowed in his neck and slowly evaporated into the air. Under the tree, the face of Monk Qingban reappeared. He blinked his eyes with some difficulty and remembered the scene of him reading scriptures and worshiping Buddha in the White Tower Temple countless years ago. Only then did he realize that everything was empty. He looked towards the distant east and revealed a complicated expression. There was a bit of frustration and sorrow. Then, he slowly closed his eyes and presumably would never open them again. It was not until then that Monk Qingban or Daosher really woke up and died. On the surface of the headless body left by Monk Qingban, many cracks suddenly appeared. The cracks gradually widened, and golden liquid flowed out of it. The golden liquid melted in the wind and turned into the purest glory of Buddha. Ning Kei looked at the scene in front of him in silence. He did not notice that Sang Sang, who was sitting by the lake behind him, looked at the golden Buddha nature with a slight frown and a pale face. He was killed by Sang Sang in the West Hill Divine Palace. Then, he was resurrected by Hao Yian's divine power. His body was now pure and clean. In the West Hill Divine Palace, his flesh and limbs were cut off by Sang Sang. Then, he was resurrected by Hao Yian's divine power. It was as if he had gone through countless changes of tendons and marrow. Now, there was no dirt in his body. It was unimaginably pure. In the cliff cave of Xiankong Temple, he completed the homework assigned by Master Lotus. If he wanted to cultivate diabolism, he had to cultivate Buddhism first. Both Buddhism and diabolism originated from avoiding the sun, but there were some similarities between them. Once they were connected, he would be very powerful. According to Lotus, he could reach the divine state if he mastered diabolism. Now, he had mastered both Buddhism and diabolism. Coupled with the teachings of the headmaster of Academy, his great spirit had reached the peak of knowing destiny state. He could even see the threshold. Now, he could kill people with his Zen and his cutlass. Not to mention Monk Qingban, a fake Buddha. He could even kill powerful elders of Commandment Hall of Xiankong Temple with his cutlass. Sang Sang said softly by the lake, "So that's how it is." She had seen through everything in the world. Chaoyang City was fake. The White Tower Temple was fake. The lonely tree and the black crow in the courtyard were fake. So were the vegetables in the market and the pickle jars in the kitchen. If they were all fake, then who was real? This was the world inside the chessboard. On the cliff plateau of Xiankong Temple, she took Ning Kei into the chessboard to find Buddha. But they were delayed for 1,000 years, just like when she entered the chessboard in Lang Temple. She didn't know she was a guest in the dream. When she was on that mountain, she saw the truth and also saw the fabrication. She experienced endless loneliness. There was no one to accompany her, and there was no one to talk to. Compared with that year, she was not so lonely this time because there was one more person beside her. But she knew that without that person, Buddha could not have trapped her for so many years. She stood up and looked at Ning Kei quietly. She said, "A green pear came into my dream. How many years we have wasted here is how many years you have wasted for me." Ning Kei ignored her. He was just thinking about how many years they had lived in this chessboard world. The more he thought about it, the more uneasy he felt. It was so long that even the pictures of the first years were blurred. Master Chi-Shan said that if you enter the chessboard from the front, a year is a moment. And if you enter the chessboard from the back, a year is a moment. Which side do we enter from? How many years have passed outside? Sang Sang was about to get angry. But after listening to Ning Kei's question, she found that he did not care about her anger at all. After a moment of silence, she said, "Since I came in, how can Buddha be so free?" Ning Kei asked, "Can you roughly calculate it?" Sang Sang thought for a moment and said, "At most a few years." Ning Kei could not understand the concept of time, flow, even though he had reached the peak of knowing destiny state. But it was not too difficult for Hao Ian. It was very dangerous. Sang Sang looked at the far east and said, "I was almost lost in time. Fortunately, I still woke up." Ning Kei looked at the sky and thought about the sound of the axe. He was a little confused. Now, he naturally understood that it was very dangerous to cultivate Buddhism in the White Tower Temple. He gradually became obsessed with Buddhism. If it were other cultivators, no matter how high their state was, it would be difficult for them to wake up from that peaceful and joyful world. If they could not wake up, they could not see through the chessboard world and could not return to the real world. Fortunately, he had the remaining fragments of Lotus consciousness in his sense of perception. Lotus was an eminent monk and also a blood sea mad devil. He was obsessed with Buddhism and hated Buddhism. Only such a magical existence could maintain a clear mind in the boundless dharma of Buddhism. He used the fragments of his consciousness to form a sharp axe to hack at Meng Qi's head, trying to wake him up with pain. Then where did the axe in the sky come from? Who wanted to wake him up? Sang Sang said, "If you did not wake up, I probably would never wake up. In this case, I will cancel what you owe me. I will not punish you." Ning Kei knew what she meant. If it were not for him, she would not be so attached to the human world. She would not be so deeply tied to the secular world. How could the chessboard trap her? He smiled and did not speak. At this moment, several rays of light suddenly appeared in the dark sky. Ning Kei was slightly shocked. Last time in the Lang Temple, he had also seen these pure rays of light in the chessboard. He knew that each ray of light was the rule of the chessboard world. The rule of the world was collapsing. It was the most terrible power. He was not afraid because he had experience in dealing with such a situation. He took out the big black umbrella and said to Sang Sang, "Let's go." He used a questioning sentence instead of saying, "Let's go" directly. He was also emotionless because he was a little uneasy. He was a little worried that she still wanted to stay in the chessboard and continue to find Buddha and kill him, which seemed impossible. He was also worried that she would return to the divine kingdom after leaving the chessboard and returning to the human world. According to Sang Sang's previous behavior, she would definitely choose to stay in the chessboard world and continue to find Buddha. That powerful enemy had unknowingly trapped her for hundreds or even thousands of years. The more it was so, the more she wanted to kill Buddha, because she was the great Hao Ian. Today, her behavior was somewhat unexpected. She walked to him and said calmly, "Let's go." Ning Kei was startled and handed the umbrella to her. With a soft bang, Sang Sang opened the big black umbrella, as if opening a piece of night. The night completely covered her and Ning Quebec. A moment passed, a moment passed, a moment passed, a moment passed, a day passed, a day passed. It seemed that after countless tribulations, the black umbrella was still by the lake, and Ning Kei and Sang Sang were still under the umbrella. Nothing had happened. They could not leave, and they were still in the chessboard. Ning Kei remembered the words Monk Qingban said before he died. "I don't want you to go." The world didn't want them to go. His face was slightly pale, and his hand holding Sang Sang trembled slightly. But why was that? In the Lang Temple, they entered the chessboard, and the rule of the world chased after Sang Sang. They opened the black umbrella, and the rule of the world could no longer find them, and they disappeared. Why did they open the black umbrella today, but not leave? Sang Sang looked at the dark sky and said after a moment of silence, "I can't sense the outside world." She was the rule. As long as she could communicate with the rule of the world outside the chessboard, she could return to the human world, just like she could return to Hao Ian's divine kingdom even if she died. The big black umbrella could make the rule of the world unable to find them, and it could also help her communicate with the rule of the outside world. If she couldn't sense it, then there were only two possibilities. The umbrella was broken, or something was wrong with her. The big black umbrella was not broken, so something was wrong with Sang Sang. Before Ning K could ask, she said, "I've become much weaker." She looked a little lost. Even though the headmaster had infused the power of the human world with her, even though Ning K had brought her into the human world, and she had been tainted by countless mortals, she still looked indifferent and extremely confident, because she was very powerful. Even if she was weak, she was still unimaginably powerful. But now, she found that she was really weak, so weak that it was hard to imagine. She closed her eyes and began to think about the reasons. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 973. Although the sky was dark, there was light. Sang Sang held the big black umbrella. Her feet were in the light, and her body was in the dark. She closed her eyes and did not blink. She was as quiet as a god. She was thinking about a question. No matter how strong Buddha was, he could not be stronger than the headmaster of the academy or the human world. So what did he do to weaken himself so much? In her quiet thoughts, countless scenes flashed through her consciousness at high speed. They were like fleeting lights and passing shadows, but they were so clear. Hundreds of years of time began to rewind, revealing the true appearance. The peace in the small courtyard, the tea and wine, the chess and streaky pork, walking hand in hand, wandering by the lake, holding an umbrella in the alley, looking at the misty rain in the ancient temple, the snowy border, were all greed. The quarrel in the small courtyard, the sea of blood in the market, the fading figure, the angry questioning, the confrontation between life and death, the irritation, the low mood, were all anger. The rest of the images were all caused by greed and anger, or led to greed and anger, which was ignorance. Greed, anger, and ignorance were the three poisons of Buddhism. The Mahayana doctrine said, greed attracts those who are not fed up with everything that is agreeable to their feelings. Anger attracts those who are angry with everything that is against their feelings. Ignorance is slow-witted and obsessed with the law of things. It is also called ignorance. The wisdom doctrine said, those who benefit from me will be greedy, and those who go against me will be angry. This knot is not born from wisdom, but from madness. So it is called ignorance. The three poisons are the root of all troubles. The Nirvana scripture said, there are no poisons more poisonous than the three poisons. Sang Sang was poisoned by greed, anger, and ignorance. Only this kind of poison could make her unable to avoid it. Last time in the Lank Temple, Buddha wanted to destroy her, but she was not awake at that time. What Buddha wanted to destroy was the imprint in her body. Now that she was awake, Buddha wanted to destroy her. To destroy something, one must first weaken it. How to make Hao Yin weak? The method that the headmaster of the academy and Buddha came up with was actually the same, but the method used was a little different. Turning a god into a human. The headmaster of the academy used the will of the human world and tried to change or reform her. Buddha used the poison of the human world and wanted to sink her into depravity. Sang Sang and Ning K were each other's natal souls. Ning K could know what she was thinking and what she was thinking. His face turned paler, and he held her hand tightly. After spending so many years in the Buddhist chessboard world, she had been deeply poisoned. Unknowingly, she had become extremely weak, so weak that she could not leave. Then, what would be waiting for her? Don't worry. Ning K held her in his arms and whispered, even if Buddha kills you, you can still return to Hao Yin's divine kingdom. Maybe one day, you will remember me and the academy. Then, he couldn't go on. If Sang Sang really used death to return, then it would be impossible. Hao Yin was Hao Yin, and there would be no more Sang Sang in the world. The Buddha did not know that the headmaster of the academy had divided Hao Yin into two, nor did he know that the academy had left one of Hao Yin in the human world. Therefore, he did not know that even if he killed Sang Sang, he could not kill Hao Yin. But Sang Sang would die. I don't want to die. Sang Sang said. Sang Sang doesn't want to die. Hao Yin, who was named Sang Sang, did not want to die. Ning Ke looked at the distant east and said, "Then we will not die." Sang Sang turned and walked out of the White Tower Temple. Ning Ke held the black umbrella and followed her. Outside the temple, she pointed to a woman under the eaves whose clothes were half wet by the rain and said, "Don't you find it strange that she has not aged after so many years?" Ning Ke said, "For countless years, the consciousness of those who believe in Buddhism will come to this chessboard after their death. This is the real Buddha land. They are dead, so naturally they will not age." Sang Sang said, "But you have not aged either." Ning Ke thought it was true. At least hundreds of years had passed, but he had not aged or died. Sang Sang looked at the light that represented the rules in the dark sky. After a moment of observation, she said, "The rules of this world have not collapsed, so why is there no death?" Ning Ke cannot explain this. Sang Sang said, "Do you know what nirvana is?" Ning Ke said, "The highest state of Buddhism is nirvana." Sang Sang said, "Nirvana is a state." "What state?" "Tranquil nirvana, unaware of life and death, cool and quiet, no annoyance, and eternal silence. It is neither born nor destroyed, neither dirty nor clean, neither increasing nor decreasing, far away from one thing, life and death, and eternal." Sang Sang said, "This is nirvana, which is to become Buddha." Ning Ke remembered that Sang Sang once mentioned the cat with the surname Shui in front of the stone statue of Buddha on Hua Mountain. He said, "If nirvana means this, no wonder even you can't predict whether Buddha is dead or alive." Sang Sang said, "The people here are the same." Ning Ke frowned and said, "You mean the people here are neither dead nor alive, so they are not dead?" Sang Sang said, "Not neither dead nor alive, but dead and alive at the same time." Ning Ke thought for a moment and said, "You are right. No one knows whether they are dead or alive before observation. They are in the superposition of the two states. No one knew whether Buddha was dead or alive, not even Hao Ian and the headmaster of the academy. It was because Buddha entered this state after nirvana that there was no answer before seeing him." Sang Sang said, "So there is neither life nor death here." Ning Ke said, "But we have lived here for hundreds of years, and we have observed them for a long time." Sang Sang said, "They are just appendages of the chessboard." Ning Ke said, "You mean these people in the chessboard are all extensions of Buddha's nirvana state?" The autumn rain had stopped, and the outside of the White Tower temple gradually became lively. Pedestrians were picking up goods at the stalls, and mothers were chasing their playful children. No one noticed that the sky had become extremely dark. Sang Sang said, "You can understand it this way. So they don't even know that they are dead. They just walk with time and don't think about anything else." Ning Ke said with mixed emotions, "Is this the nirvana that Buddha mentioned?" She said, "You said that this is the Buddha land." "Yes, this is the real nirvana. If you and I don't wake up, we will eventually become a part of this world." Ning Ke looked at the pedestrians on the street and suddenly felt cold. He and Sang Sang had almost become a part of this world. At that time, they would not know whether they were alive or dead. Would it be the nirvana or the nirvana? This was the true meaning of nirvana. Heaven and Buddha could calculate. When Buddha entered nirvana, heaven could not calculate Buddha, but Buddha could calculate heaven. Buddha did not jump out of cause and effect, but he could see through cause and effect and go with the flow. Cause and effect, that was why, and it was also the principle of the academy. Because Ning Ke picked up the baby girl on the side of Hebei province. Because the headmaster of the academy took Ning Ke as a disciple. Because Ning Ke wanted Sang Sang to become a human, and because they loved each other, they came to this day. We finally woke up. How can Buddha kill you? Ning Ke said, "Since he has entered nirvana, he can't do anything." I'm also curious. Sang Sang handed the black umbrella to him and walked into the street with her hands behind her back. She said, "I really want to know what that monk can do to me." Her tone was calm and proud. Holding the black umbrella, Ning Ke did not dare to leave her. Looking at the light in the sky and her pale cheeks, he sighed and said, "You are so sick. Can you stop blowing?" Waking up didn't mean that she could leave. The three poisons of greed, aversion, and obsession made Sang Sang very weak. She could not solve this situation easily, so what would happen next would be very troublesome. Walking through the crowded streets, Ning Ke suddenly stopped and looked to somewhere in the far east. Monk Qingban also looked there before he died, but there was nothing there. Back in the small courtyard, Ning Ke made a sumptuous dinner. The most appetizing dish was the bowl of green and red pickled peppers and tender ginger. Of course, he did not forget Song Song's favorite cabbage head in vinegar. The big black umbrella was propped on the table, and the dishes were placed beside the umbrella handle. He and Sang Sang sat under the umbrella and lowered their heads to eat. The scene was a little weird and also a little funny. Sang Sang fiddled with the rice mixed with the broth in the bowl with chopsticks and looked at the dishes on the table covered by the umbrella shadow. She said, "You know it's fake, but why do you still eat so happily?" Ning Ke was burying his head in the food. The pickled peppers made him sweat, and he was very happy. Hearing this, he picked up a towel to wipe his mouth and said, "I feel it's real, so I eat happily." Sang Sang looked at the big black umbrella above and frowned slightly. She said, "I don't know why I have to hold an umbrella to eat. I'm not happy." Hao Yin, who was omnipotent, was forced to eat with an umbrella by the light that represented rules in the dark sky. It was indeed a little sad. Don't be dissatisfied. You have to thank the umbrella for being here all the time, and you have to thank me for mending it. Ning Ke pointed to the big black umbrella and said with a smile, "It will be new for 3 years, old for 3 years, and mending for another 3 years. This black umbrella will definitely become our family heirloom in the future." With the big black umbrella around, they did not have to worry about being discovered by the light that represented rules. But how could they leave? After dinner, they began to think about this problem. They had been in the chessboard for many years, but Ning Ke and Sang Sang were not in a hurry, at least on the surface. They thought they still had enough time to solve the problem. The three poisons of greed, aversion, and obsession were indeed the poisons of all poisons. Sang Sang had no way to cure them, and Ning Ke could not think of a way either. In this case, life had to go on. Last night's dinner was too sumptuous, and there were no more vegetables at home. So Ning Ke went to the market to buy vegetables. Now Sang Sang naturally followed him without his request, because they only had one umbrella. When they arrived at the market, they found that their idea was wrong. With the big black umbrella, the light could not find them, but people could. Standing in front of the dewy green vegetable stall, Ning Ke was chatting with the familiar middle-aged woman, paving the way for the subsequent bargaining. The woman thought he was very cute, so she smiled. Her smile was very beautiful, dignified, and compassionate, and there was a red mole between her eyebrows. Ning Ke was also smiling at the beginning, and then his smile gradually disappeared. He looked at the woman and asked seriously, "What kind of Buddha are you?" Chapter 1. The task will definitely be completed before going to bed. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 974. The Annie did not speak, but just looked at him with a smile. She held a yam in her left hand and a handful of celery in her right hand. Both were vegetables and medicine. Ning Ke suddenly laughed and said, "Are you the legendary medicine Buddha?" The Annie smiled and said yes. Ning Ke thought for a while and said, "The medicine Buddha can cure diseases. My wife is seriously ill. She should be poisoned. I wonder if you could take a look and write a prescription for her." The Annie looked at Sang Sang and said with pity, "The poison is incurable. It's better to go back." Ning Ke pointed to the sky and said, "What if I don't go back?" The Annie said, "Death is liberation." That makes sense, Ning Ke said with a smile. Then he pulled out his iron cutlass and chopped at the Annie behind the vegetable stall. The vegetable stall was full of green vegetables with dew on the leaves, which looked very fresh. Ning Ke's iron cutlass should have easily chopped the vegetable stall into 2 halves, chopped the leaves into countless pieces, and chopped the dew into moist foam. But he didn't, because the vegetable stall turned into a field. The green vegetables on the stall turned into lush plants. The yam in the auntie's left hand turned into a fruit branch, and the celery in her right hand turned into a Buddha bowl. The auntie turned into the real medicine Buddha. Her hair was black and plump, and her ears fell on her shoulders. She looked solemn, and countless halos and auspicious clouds surrounded her. In front of the medicine Buddha, there were thousands of colorful banners fluttering. It was these banners that blocked Ning Kei's cutlass. Ning Kei looked at the Buddha statue that was so close to him, but seemed so far away. He said in shock, "It's true." The medicine Buddha smiled slightly. The red mole between her eyebrows shone brightly, illuminating the vast field around her. The colorful banners fluttered faster and faster, and the plants in the field grew taller and taller. Ning Kei and Sang Sang stood in the field. Their legs were instantly entangled by the green vines and could no longer leave. The medicine Buddha chanted the name of Buddha and slowly tilted the alms bowl in her hand. The black liquid in the alms bowl dripped onto the ground and turned into a river, rushing toward Ning Kei and Su Li. Medicine was used to cure and save people, but it could also be used to kill people. Sometimes, good medicine could become the most powerful poison. Ning Kei only felt a stuffiness in his chest when he smelled the strange fragrance in the medicine river, followed by a sharp pain. He covered his chest and coughed, as if he was going to cough out his internal organs. Sang Sang stood beside him and looked at the medicine Buddha in the distance. She frowned slightly and said, "How ridiculous." After saying this, she blinked her eyes, and the field was shattered. The lush plants were turned into pieces, and the fragrant medicine river was shaken out of the river and spread in all directions. The vegetable stall was still the same vegetable stall. Ning Kei waved the iron cutlass, and with a shrill sound of friction, the blade slashed across the ant's body, leaving a neat cut for which a faint golden light shone. The auntie smiled at the two of them. With a cracking sound, her body was divided into two halves and scattered on the ground. The smooth cut was enshrouded in golden light, as if there were countless melted gold flowing. The gold melted in the wind and dispersed in a golden mist, gradually drifting around the vegetable market. Some of the golden mist floated in front of Sang Sang. She frowned slightly, and her face became paler, as if she was in pain. They couldn't buy vegetables after killing all the vegetable sellers. Ning Kei returned to the small courtyard with a heavy heart, especially when he thought of the last scene, which made him feel even more uneasy. Whether it was the real medicine Buddha or the fake one, in front of him and Sang Sang, they didn't have much resistance, just like Monk Qingban turned into the masked Buddha. But the Buddha's aura after their death seemed to hurt Sang Sang. What if they met these Buddhas again in the future? They had to leave this world as soon as possible. "We have to find a way to detoxify the poison in your body." He looked at Sang Sang and said. Sang Sang's face was a little pale, and she said, "What if I can't detoxify it?" Ning Kei didn't want her to worry, so he said with a smile, "You won't die even if I can't detoxify it. Life has to go on." Sang Sang looked at his eyes quietly and said, "Life is poison." Ning Kei understood, but he didn't know how to answer. After a moment of silence, he said, "Let's go." This time he didn't ask questions because he didn't mean to leave the chessboard world, but to leave the small courtyard or Chaoyang City. He was going to cure Sang Sang and detoxify her. Just like many years ago, they had lived in the small courtyard for many years, so they naturally had many memories and many household necessities. But Ning Kei's luggage was very simple. In addition to weapons and food, there was only a jar of pickles. Sang Sang asked, "Where are we going?" Ning Kei subconsciously looked to the far east again, but he was a little scared. He said, "To the south." Sang Sang's pale cheeks suddenly turned red, and she said, "Are you going to see her?" Ning Kei was stunned and then understood what she was talking about. He said with a smile, "There is no great river kingdom in the south of this world." Sang Sang said, "But you're used to going to the south." Ning Kei was confused and asked, "So?" Sang Sang said, "You just want to see her in your heart." Ning Kei was a little angry and said, "Why are you still talking about this at this time?" Sang Sang was silent and found that there was indeed something wrong with her. It wasn't that there was something wrong with her attitude towards him. She was Hao Yin, and he was immortal, Even if they were husband and wife, she had her reasons to treat him. The problem was that her state of mind was a little unstable. This was anger, and there was also greed. The poison in her body was getting worse. Ning Ke understood something and held her in his arms, saying, "I will definitely cure you." After tying the heavy luggage behind him, Ning Ke held the big black umbrella, left the small courtyard, and walked to the city gate. Sang Sang held his hand under the umbrella, looking a little weak. If they wanted to break the Buddha's chessboard, they needed to restore Song Song's strength, detoxify the poison in her body, find a way to detoxify, and find a way to leave. Monk Qingban didn't want them to go. The Medicine Buddha didn't want them to go. Chaoyang City didn't want them to go. And the world didn't want them to go. Naturally, they couldn't leave so easily. There was a shop at the corner of New Street, which specialized in selling lamp oil and lamps, and also sold candles. Ning Ke often bought lamp oil here and was familiar with the boss. But when he saw the boss today, his expression changed slightly. The boss was not in the shop, but on the street. The boss blocked their way. Ning Ke pulled out the iron cutlass and asked, "Who are you?" The boss wore a hat and looked amiable. He said with a smile, "Guess." Looking at the dense oil lamps in the shop, Ning Ke asked with some uncertainty, "Dipankara Buddha?" It was indeed the Dipankara Buddha. There was no oil lamp shop owner on the street, only an old Buddha. Outside the Buddha's body, everything was a bright lamp, emitting countless rays of light. Even the ant nests in the corners of the walls were clearly illuminated, and even the dark sky seemed to be lit up. The light began to burn, and the temperature on the street began to rise. A drop of sweat appeared on the tip of Song Song's nose. When she was still an ordinary person, she rarely sweated because of the congenital cold. After becoming Hao Yin, her divine body was as cold as jade, and she didn't sweat at all. But in front of the Dipankara Buddha, she sweated. Ning Ke felt that his heart became extremely hot, as if someone had placed an oil lamp in it. The Great Spirit rose, and in an instant he rushed to the front of the Dipankara Buddha and chopped down with his cutlass. The Dipankara Buddha dropped the lamp. The seemingly ordinary copper oil lamp seemed to be as heavy as a world, and it easily suppressed Ning Ke's iron cutlass. The ancient Buddha began to light up thousands of lamps, and the world shone brightly. In just an instant, more than 10,000 lamps were lit. Even with Ning Ke's reaction speed, he couldn't react. Just when the 16,000th lamp was lit, Sang Sang finally made a move. She stretched out her right index finger and gently pressed against the bottom of the copper oil lamp. The expression of the Dipankara Buddha changed slightly. Even the ancient Buddha couldn't compete with heaven. The copper oil lamp in the hands of the Dipankara Buddha could no longer be put down. Ning Ke shook his wrist, and the iron cutlass was placed in front of his forearm, sweeping across the neck of the Dipankara Buddha. The head of the Dipankara Buddha didn't fall, but there was a very clear cut on his neck. There was still no blood in the cut, only a very strong golden light. And then there was flowing gold slowly seeping out along the cut, wetting the robe of the ancient Buddha and dripping to the ground. The gold-like liquid was the breath of the Buddha, which contained infinite Buddha's power and Buddha's will. It turned into a golden fog in the wind, and the light that was refracted was the Buddha's light. Ning Ke's expression changed slightly. He held Song Song's hand and ran to the other end of the street. He was so fast that he didn't have time to look back to see whether the Dipankara Buddha was dead or alive. He just ran desperately and didn't stop until he ran to the end of the long street. Song Song's face was very pale, and her brows were tightly furrowed, as if she was in great pain. Looking at the drop of golden liquid on the hem of her flowery indigo dress, Ning Ke knew that he still couldn't avoid it. "Next time, stand behind me, and the Buddha's light won't fall on you." He pulled Sang Sang in front of him, looked in her eyes, and said very seriously. Sang Sang looked at the tip of her shoe and whispered, "I'm afraid that I will get lost." Ning Ke was silent for a moment, and then he untied the heavy luggage, took out the arrow box and the brocade bag containing the fu paper, and threw away everything else, including the pickle jar. He carried her on his back, tied their bodies with a rope, and handed the big black umbrella to her. With the arrow box in one hand and the iron cutlass in the other, he walked toward the direction of the city gate. On the street, the pickle jar had cracked, giving off a fragrance that only an old jar could have. Ninkei walked out of Chaoyang City with Sang Sang on his back and met many Buddhas along the way. The officials of the Academy of Music, holding the sound device, turned into the best sound Buddha. The storyteller in the tile alley turned into the Nanja Buddha. The Duda in a small temple turned into the Dharma Buddha. Many people turned into Buddhas and were killed by him. Ninkei couldn't understand why these people turned into Buddhas, why there were so many Buddhas, where did these Buddhas come from, and why did they become Buddhas? Everyone can become Buddhas. Sang Sang leaned on his shoulder and said weakly, "This is the business of the masses." Chapter 2. To be continued. If you like this work, please come Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my greatest motivation. Chapter 975. The serfs living in the underground world under the Xiankong temple only knew the round sky and the Buddha. They had no choice, so their faith was the purest. In the human world, there were many devout Buddhist believers like them. After countless generations, the believers died, and their awareness came to the chessboard of the Buddha, forming the nirvana. According to Buddhism, what kind of world could be qualified to be called the nirvana? That was the world where everyone could become Buddha. In Chaoyang City at this time, all the servants, peddlers, officials, and monks were merciful and chanting. They were Buddhas, all of them were Buddhas. Ninkei and Sang Sang wanted to know what Buddha would do to kill them after they woke up. Now they saw the answer. All living beings were doing business with all living beings. Men, women, old, and young all became Buddhas and surrounded them. They looked solemn and merciful, chanting scriptures. They did not mention killing, but the intention of all living beings was to kill Hao Yin and Sang Sang. There was a man who had carried a load for decades and had calluses on his shoulders. He was a thick-shouldered Buddha. There was a girl who was enlightened by the rising sun. He was a Buddha who was born in the sun. There was an old man who was fishing in the river. He was a Buddha who was enlightened by the net. There was also a Buddha of fame, a Buddha of Dharma, a Buddha of light, a Buddha of various colors, a Buddha of incense, a Buddha of light, a Buddha of all righteousness, and many other Buddhas with no names. The whole city was crowded with Buddhas. One Buddha stepped on another Buddha's kasaya, and another Buddha smashed the jade flower in the Buddha's hand. The Buddhas squeezed and pushed each other toward Ninkei and Sang Sang. Looking at this shocking scene, Ninkei seemed to go back to those years in Chaoyang City. Countless people wanted to kill Sang Sang, the daughter of Yama, who was on his back. When he saw that the man who played monkey tricks also became a Buddha, and even a monkey on his shoulder became a bad-tempered fighting Buddha, he could not bear it anymore and rushed over with his iron cutlass. He had killed many Buddhas on his way out of the city. He wanted to stop for a while. Because all Buddhas had Dharma, they were not easy to kill. More importantly, he knew that these Buddhas would turn into Buddha's light after they were killed, which would make Sang Sang suffer. However, if he didn't kill these Buddhas, he wouldn't be able to escape from Chaoyang City with Sang Sang on his back. He could only hold the iron saber and hack at those Buddhas. It was as if someone was sweeping the floor with a bamboo broom. The black iron knife danced back and forth among the solemn-looking Buddhas. The blade cut through the necks and chests of the Buddhas. Countless Buddhas fell. The black blade was covered with golden liquid and then turned into pure light. Suvajra Buddha was dead. He fell to the ground as if he was in a deep slumber. Then he was trampled into golden pieces by the other Buddhas. Thick Shoulders Buddha was dead. His right shoulder had been completely sliced off by the iron blade. He looked like an unfinished golden statue. Sun Rebirth Buddha was dead. A golden scar appeared on the girl's beautiful face. It looked extremely terrifying. Ninkei waved his cutlass and moved forward. Every time the iron cutlass fell, a Buddha would die. There was no emotion on his face. No matter who was in front of him, whether it was an old man or a child, they were all cut in half. When the Buddhas were injured, they wouldn't bleed. Only golden liquid flowed out. However, the scene was still bloody. Ninkei was extremely cold-blooded even more cold-blooded than he was in Chaoyang City. On the night when the academy climbed the mountain, he had been so cold-blooded. No matter who stood in his way, whether they were old acquaintances or new acquaintances, relatives or friends, they were all killed by him, because he knew they were all dead. These Buddhas were also dead. Since they were already dead, it was not a big deal to kill them again. Of course, Buddhas were Buddhas after all. Each of them had their own tools. Although Ning Ke had become very powerful and had the help of Sang Sang, it was still very difficult for him to kill them. To kill all the Buddhas, he had never thought about it. Ning Ke cut off the neck of the smiling Buddha. Looking at the smiling Buddha's head on the ground, Ning Ke felt a little tired. At this moment, a Buddha's power fell from the sky and attacked his back from the right. It was a shining golden brick thrown by the Buddha from afar. If Ning Ke didn't move, the golden brick with infinite Buddha's power would fall on Sang Sang. He could only dodge it hurriedly and let the brick hit the top of his right arm. There was a muffled sound. Ning Ke felt as if his soul was about to be slapped out of his body by the golden brick. He spat out a mouthful of dirty blood. Sang Sang was also affected and spat out a mouthful of blood, which wet his collar. If a cultivator from the Buddhism or Taoism sect was hit by the Buddha's golden brick, his arm bones would have been broken. Fortunately, he had mastered the Great Spirit, and his body was as hard as Vajra. He only felt pain. With a clang, he sheathed the iron cutlass and took the iron bow from his shoulder. He pulled the bowstring to a full moon and shot at the Buddha in the distance. There was no arrow on the bowstring. It was just an empty shot. However, in the next moment, an extremely deep crack appeared on the chest of the Sumera Buddha. Golden liquid continuously flowed out of the crack. The shape was extremely similar to a bow. Ning Ke killed the Buddha with the bowstring. Finally reaching the city gate, he was still surrounded by Buddhas. Those Buddhas shed a lot of blood and turned into countless lights, which clearly illuminated the shabby city gate of Chaoyang City. In the Buddha's light, Sang Sang's face became paler and paler. The Buddha's method was to kill the heaven with the Buddha's light, which was what she was most afraid of. Ning Ke clearly felt her pain. His heart trembled and even began to hurt, but he ignored it and did not comfort her. He continued to rush toward the field outside the city gate. He held the iron bow with his left hand and pulled the bowstring with his right hand. Buzzing, 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 as if the string of zither was broken or someone was playing cotton, the Buddhas around the city gate cracked and died. The Buddha's light seeped out from those cracks and filled the field, becoming more and more intense. Sang Sang frowned more and more and spat out more and more blood. Sang Sang woke up with a start and looked at the dark bottom of the cave silently. Her eyes were a little dim, and no one knew what she was thinking. Ning Ke held her in his arms and asked, "What's wrong?" Sang Sang said, "I had a nightmare." Ning Ke was stunned. He forced a smile and asked, "That's new. What did you dream about?" Hao Ian could not dream. Only mortals could. She began to dream, which meant that she began to become a real mortal. Whether it was the secular world left in her by the headmaster of academy, or the three poisons of greed, anger, and obsession, they were all becoming stronger and stronger. I dreamed of a lot of Buddhas. They picked up knives and cut their faces and bodies to make themselves bleed. They squeezed the wounds hard to make the blood flow faster, but there was no expression of pain on their faces. Some Buddhas were burning firewood to make the blood evaporate faster. Some Buddhas even jumped down from the cliff. Sang Sang's face was expressionless, but there was fear in her eyes. Ning Ke's fingers became slightly cold as he thought of those scenes when he rushed out of Chaoyang City. Sang Sang was very weak now. This world full of Buddha's light was too scary for her. Hold on a little longer. He gently stroked her back. If I go on like this, I will die. There was still no expression on Sang Sang's face. In addition to fear, there was also pain in her eyes. Death meant the end, an eternal sleep. For any existence with self-consciousness, this was the most terrible thing. She had never thought that she would die, so she had never been afraid until now. Ning Ke said, "I won't let you die." Sang Sang said, "You have said this many times. There is no other meaning except to comfort yourself." Ning Ke looked into her eyes and said, The ending of the story should not be like this. Now that we have woken up, we must be able to find a way to leave. Sang Sang said, "You said before that this is not a story in a book." Ning Ke said, "No matter what the story is, I am the hero and you are the heroine. So we should not die. Maybe in this story, we are just supporting roles." Sang Sang looked at the dark night sky outside the cave, looked at the Buddha's light gradually spreading in the field, and listened to the sutra gradually becoming clearer. She said, "Because this is the story of Buddha." Ning Ke was silent for a long time and said, "Sleep a little longer. We can still stay for a while." Sang Sang turned to one side and continued to sleep. Ning Ke sat beside her and looked at her frowning eyebrows, aggrieved lips, and painful expression from time to time. He felt very sad and reached out to smooth her eyebrows. Sang Sang never showed a painful expression when she was awake. They left the cave in the early morning and continued to walk south according to the original plan. It did not take long before they entered the deep forest with dense vegetation. Ning Ke relaxed a little. He thought that this place was so desolate that it could not be like Chaoyang City, where there were Buddhas and Buddha's light everywhere. He was right, but not accurate enough. There were indeed not so many Buddhas in the deep forest in the south, but there were still Buddhas. The woodcutter they met on the mountain road was a Buddha. In the middle of the night, another Buddha came riding a spotted tiger. Ning Ke continued to kill Buddhas. It was very hard, and he got more and more injuries. Sang Sang also became weaker and weaker. Under the torture of the 3 poisons, her face was as pale as snow. In order to relax, he began to sing the song of the black pig again. Sang Sang was very unhappy and wanted to pretend to be black. But her face was too pale and did not look threatening at all. She shouted angrily, "You only know how to bully me when I am weak." Ning Ke reached behind and patted her buttocks. He said, "It's the Buddha who poisoned you. It has nothing to do with me. It's true that I bully you, but I can't take advantage of you." At this moment, a wild boar covered in black mud jumped out of the forest. The wild boar looked at Ning Ke foolishly and ran away as soon as it felt the danger. Sang Sang said weakly, "The crow landed on the back of the pig. The bald donkey and the academy are all evil." With a strange caw, a black crow flew over and landed somewhere in the forest. After a moment, the wild boar covered in black mud walked out of the forest dejectedly. The black crow stood on its back, flaunting its might. Sang Sang said, "We will eat pork tonight." Ning Ke said angrily. The crow landed on the back of the pig. "You're on my back. Am I a pig?" Sang Sang leaned on his shoulder and whispered, "If you're not a pig, why are you here?" It's July in the blink of an eye. Please vote for Jiang Yi with your guaranteed monthly votes and recommendation votes on Monday. Thank you. I will continue to write. There is one more chapter. To be continued. If you like this work, please come to Chidian. Come to vote for me. Your support is my biggest motivation. You're tuning in to the Warrior Lore YouTube channel. Don't forget to subscribe and join us on this journey to catch the most captivating stories.